On the 14th of March 1989, 21-year-old University of Texas student Mark Kilroy was kidnapped in the city of Matamoros in Mexico whilst enjoying a trip away on spring break. After extensive searching, his body was found on the 11th of April 1989 at a remote ranch in the Mexican desert, the compound of a cult known as Los Narcos Satánicos, or the Narco Satanists, led by this man, Adolfo Constanzo, who preached that human sacrifice would make his followers immune from law enforcement interference into their drug-dealing activities. Mark's mutilated remains were found buried on the grounds of the property and showed that he'd been sodomized and tortured for hours before his death. His brain had also been removed and boiled in a cauldron. As if this horror was not bad enough, the remains of 14 other people who died in a similar fashion were found buried on the compound, although it's believed the cult murdered over 20 people. This is just the tip of the horror found at the ranch, which was scattered with bones and blood, as human organs, including brains and hearts being found in a cauldron. The scene was described as, quote, a human slaughterhouse. The violence and depravity are outlined in the case of the Rouleau cult, headed by Michael Wainwright in the 1980s, pales into insignificance compared to this group. So please, prepare yourself to plumb the depths of complete inhumanity. Welcome to Evil My Lass. This video comes with a proviso and a warning. Firstly, this is a complicated case. There are contradictory narratives from various sources, even in books that have been published. This mainly seems to revolve around details of dates, that victims other than Mark Kilroy died, but I've tried to be as accurate as possible. Secondly, a warning. This case is extremely disturbing and involves graphic descriptions of torture and murder. So please, if this is likely to offend you, end the video now. So, Mark James Kilroy was born on the 5th of March 1968 in Chicago, Illinois, in the Midwestern United States. He was the son of James William Kilroy, a chemical engineer, and Heather Josephine Kilroy, a volunteer paramedic. Soon after his birth, the family relocated to the city of Santa Fe in Texas, which is where Mark grew up. He was a polite and studious young man who, since his early childhood, had always wanted to be a doctor. He was a popular student and excelled in his studies at Santa Fe High School. He was also a keen sportsman, including being on a basketball team. Mark did well on his SATs, and when he graduated from high school, obtained a place at the University of Texas at Austin, studying medicine. He was well on his way to realizing his dream. During his first year at college, he spent spring break with his friends in the town of South Padre Island in Texas, which lies on a barrier island off the coast of the state. This was, and still is, a popular destination for students due to the beautiful landscape and party atmosphere. It's also a mere 20 miles from the US-Mexico border, so students often drive or walk across so they can enjoy a, quote, two-nation vacation. Unfortunately, despite the party atmosphere and the beautiful scenery, this area of the United States, particularly the border between South Texas and Mexico, is extremely dangerous, and today is the most significant drug smuggling corridor along the whole 1,954-mile US-Mexico border. This is due to the large number of border crossing points, 17 in total, which is more than the combined number of entry points for two of the other states which border Mexico, California and New Mexico. There's also the opportunities for maritime smuggling along the Texas coast. Given that this is the heart of the drug trade, it's also the epicenter of organized criminality. This region is controlled by the various cartels who have committed horrific acts of violence in order to protect their turf and the multi-billion-dollar drug trade. An epicenter of this criminality has, for decades, been the city of Matamoros, which is just over the border from the city of Brownsville. There's some extremely dangerous men roam the streets, including sicarios, or hitmen, and falcones, or falcons, whose job is to be the eyes and ears on the street, spying on rival cartels' activities, but also looking for victims, whether they be Mexican, US, or any other nationality, to smuggle drugs across the border. However, in the 1980s, there was another group roaming the streets of Matamoros, henchmen for a dangerous cult, looking for victims to be sacrificed, in order to convince their deranged followers that they now had magical powers. Mark Kilroy could not have known this, and so in 1989, as soon as spring break came round, he wanted to return to South Padre Island in Texas, but also explore across the Mexican border. On Friday, March the 10th, 1989, Mark and three of his friends, Bradley Moore, Bill Huddleston, and Brent Martin, set out on the 9-hour drive to South Padre Island. They arrived on Saturday the 11th of March and began partying and summing themselves straight away, having a good time. In the late evening of Sunday the 12th of March, a group headed for Matamoros, crossing at the city of Brownsville, joining around 15,000 spring break revelers for more partying. The group returned across the border into the US in the early hours of Monday the 13th of March. After spending the day recovering and sunbathing, they decided to return to the border city of Matamoros. At around 11 p.m. on Monday the 13th of March 1989, four friends, Mark, Bradley, Bill and Brent, parked their car near the crossing of Brownsville and walked across into the city of Matamoros. The next few hours the group partied and drank, but around 2 a.m. on Tuesday the 14th of March, they decided it was time to return across the border. At 2 a.m, they began walking down the main strip and approached a bar called Garcia, where Bradley and Mark separated from the group to relieve themselves behind a tree. Bradley soon returned, but Mark had disappeared. The friends were not too concerned at this point. They thought that Mark had just wandered off, but after searching for him for 2 hours, they began to worry. This was a time before mobile phones, so there was no way to contact Mark directly. Around 4 a.m, they crossed back over the US border and went back to South Padre Island, hoping that Mark would either be there or would soon reappear. He didn't. What the group didn't know was that when Mark went out of their sight to relieve himself behind a tree, he was approached by two men, Serafin Hernandez and Mario Torres, who quickly bundled him into a van. These men had been looking for a human sacrifice, specifically in the American, and they were now driving Mark to his horrific death 20 miles away in the Mexican desert to a place called Rancho Santa Elena, the compound of Los Narcos Satanicos, or the Narcos Satanists, a place where so many had already been tortured and brutally executed. This place of horror was led by a sadistic psychopath called Adolfo Constanzo. Adolfo de Jesus Constanzo was born on the 1st November 1962 in Miami, Florida. His mother was a woman called Delia Aurora Gonzalez. I've not been able to find out the name of his father, but he died when Constanzo was very young. Delia was born in Cuba and was a follower of a religion known as Santeria, which translates to, quote, "way of the saints." Santeria is polytheistic, i.e. belief in many deities, known as Orokai, with a strong belief in rituals that by performing these tasks in a specific way, a person can be given protection from evil and misfortune in their life, as well as imbued with spiritual and sometimes supernatural powers. These rituals could include dancing, drumming, speaking and eating with the spirits. Two specific parts of this belief system are important. Firstly is the practice of giving offerings to the Orokai, which can include fruit, alcohol, flowers, and sacrifice animals, although this latter practice is not as common as when the belief system formed in the late 19th century. Secondly, part of the belief system, an important part of this case, is that a human head contains the person's essence. However, like any belief system, there's always a flip side. Whilst those practicing Santeria appear to believe that the spirits they worship are good and will protect them from evil spirits, those who follow Palo Mayombe, which has been called the, quote, dark side of Santeria, believe they can achieve the same outcomes, protection, spiritual and supernatural powers, by pleasing evil spirits. It's here where the belief in human sacrifice and horrific acts of torture and degradation fit in. The more horrific the act, the more power is given to the participant. From a 1991 Washington Post article, I found the following quote: "In the rituals of Palo Mayombe, we learn it's important that the offering die confusion and pain, and, most of all, in fear. A soul taken in violence and terror could be captured and used by the priest, turned into a powerful, angry servant. Spellcasting seems to be a feature of both belief systems, but in Palo Mayombe, it appears the purpose of these and the steps to achieve them are rooted in horror and evil. Many of these spells, quote, require bodily fluids such as sperm or blood, which the believers consider sacred. Even the most benevolent ceremonies and spells require the blood of animals, usually chickens, to be offered to the spirits of the dead. However, as we'll see, the potions needed to be brewed for these spells and rituals sometimes contain human body parts and organs. This inhuman concoction would be made in a sacred cauldron called an nganga. This is just a summary of my research. I'd never heard of either belief system before looking into this case, so I tried my best to condense a lot of articles and documents. It may not be spot on, but I get the impression that, to put it simply, Palo Mayombe can be seen in line with devil worship to a greater or lesser extent. The path that Adolfo Constanzo would take was set when he was just 6 months old, when Delia had him blessed by a Palo Mayombe priest, so apparently placing him on the side of Satan. This doesn't seem surprising when looking at the family's background, It appears that much of Constanzo's extended family were involved in organised crime, with many of them being cartel members. Delia was known to the police due to being a thief. For some reason, Delia convinced herself that her son was, quote, the chosen one, and chosen for great things, putting into this child's head that he was somehow special, better than everyone else, which was a concept in his twisted mind that would only grow as the years progressed. As a child, Constanzo was described as never laughing and obsessively neat. He appeared strange to adults around him, as he didn't act like a child. By the age of 4 years old, he'd already developed an obsession with his appearance, including making sure he didn't leave the house unless his clothes and his hair were immaculate. As I stated earlier, Constanzo's father died when he was young, and after his death, when Constanzo was around 5 years old, his mother took him to Puerto Rico, where she soon remarried. The new husband was Catholic, so Delia went along with this and hid her true belief system. Constanzo was baptized, and bizarrely, was even an altar boy for a short time. However, Delia would frequently take her son to Haiti, telling her husband they were visiting family. In fact, they were there to learn about Haitian voodoo. Again, this appears to be another belief system, where rituals and spells are performed in order to gain power from spirits, including animal sacrifices. It's recorded that both Delia and her son were involved in these rituals. Edward Humes' book on this case, called Buried Secrets, includes the following quote: Adolfo Constanzo's earliest childhood memory was not of a favourite toy or a parent's smile, but the gurgling death rattle of a chicken's slit throat, its blood offering up to the ancient African gods. He knew a home filled with decay and blood, inuring him to death. His reward for good behaviour was the gift of an animal to mutilate or kill. It's clear that Delia was a woman obsessed with spirits, connecting with and drawing power from them, and would seek out any religion which she believed she could learn from in order to achieve this goal, which, as I've already outlined, appears to be underpinned by a belief in the power of the evil. How old Constanzo was when he was exposed to all of this is unclear, but it was before he eventually returned to Miami in 1972, so he would have been less than 10 years old. When reading about this case, I noticed that many articles use the word cult when talking about voodoo, Santeria, and Palo Mayombe, and I can see why. This may be an unfair characterization, but I've noticed that each belief system mentioned seems to have a single person or group of people in charge who are seen as almost divine, with followers falling at their feet, following their every word and command with the promise that, if they do, they'll be elevated above other mere mortals. However, these people are clearly motivated by wanting to secure power over people, and, in some cases, a sadistic desire to harm others. Shortly after Constanzo moved back to Miami at the age of 10, Delia's second husband died. After this, she moved to Little Havana and openly practiced her various beliefs, with clients paying her money to cast spells to bring them good fortune. The neighbours didn't take too kindly to this, and they would sometimes find the bodies of headless goats and chickens on their doorsteps. Delia found another husband within less than 12 months, a local drug dealer who also had the same beliefs. He imparted his wisdom to the still developing Constanzo, telling him, quote, "Let the non-believers kill themselves with drugs. We will profit from their foolishness." Constanzo attended school in the US, but was eventually expelled, and instead became an apprentice of a local Palo Mayombe priest who was teaching about various spells and rituals, which almost always included animal sacrifices. However, his education also included how to manipulate others and how to make as much money as possible from the shows he would put on for those often desperate people looking for answers. Adolfo Constanzo rose through the ranks quickly, in no small part because of his mother Delia, with her claiming that her son could see into the future, that he predicted the shooting of Ronald Reagan in 1981 and could speak to the dead. People would flock from miles around to visit the young sorcerer, who would read tarot cards and sacrifice animals to bring them good luck. This spiritual service didn't come cheap though. Constanzo could get these gullible people to pay whatever he wanted, and he did. In 1983, aged 21, Adolfo Constanzo moved to Mexico City, looking for new opportunities. He was charismatic, good-looking and charming, and soon set himself up as a sorcerer, and again people would flock from miles around to pay him for his services. His clients went from local residents with a few dollars to the rich and famous, including actors, models, doctors and property moguls. He soon built up a client list of around 30 people who would pay him anywhere up to $4,000 a session for him to slaughter an animal, put it in a pot, say some magic words, and promise the earth. Amongst his clients were corrupt police officers, government officials, who were in the pockets of the cartels, he soon became a trusted spiritual advisor to drug lords and hitmen alike. The level of superstition these men had and the amount of influence that Constanzo wielded was substantial. Cartel bosses would even schedule their drug shipments based on his advice, which he obtained from communicating with the dead. Constanzo was in an infallible position. He would make the most outlandish claims. He claimed his spells could literally make people invisible from the eyes of the police. He also told people that, after a visit from him, they'd be bulletproof. If he was wrong, especially regarding the bulletproof claim, there was often no one to come back and complain, or he would simply say they'd not followed his instructions or had misconstrued the meanings of his premonitions. This same year, 1983, Constanzo apparently pledged himself to Satan, but in other versions of the story that I've read, he potentially said that he was Satan himself. Rapidly, Adolfo Constanzo amassed a following of people who worshipped him like a god. He soon began to claim that his cauldron needed human remains to increase its power. In 1985, he and 3 of his followers went to graveyards, dug up corpses, dismembered them, and added these parts to his cauldron. Whether Constanzo actually believed in any of this is something we'll return to later, but it seems as though this vile drink was consumed by his followers eagerly. However, within a year, Constanzo declared to his ever-increasing cult following that the cauldron needed flesh from recently deceased humans, those who had been tortured, as this way he could entrap their souls in this vessel and use them for evil until the end of time. Around this time, in 1986, Constanzo began to direct his followers to bring in people to torture and to kill. Over the next few years, bodies started appearing on the streets of Mexico City, showing signs of torture and often missing parts of their body, including limbs. These were predominantly drug smugglers. These body parts end up in Constanzo's cauldron. In 1987, Constanzo was introduced to the Calzada family, a powerful cartel. The patriarch of the family, Guillermo, quickly bought into Constanzo's performances, so the reason why his drug shipments were getting through was because of him. Constanzo was soon a wealthy man, owning a fleet of luxury cars and a condominium in Mexico City. Constanzo soon demanded to be a full partner with the family, but this was refused. In April 1987, Guillermo Calzada and 6 members of his family disappeared. In his office, police found evidence of a religious ceremony, including an altar and candles, both of which were soaked with blood, evidence of the practice of Palo Mayombe. A week later, the remains of 7 people, the missing Calzada family, were found floating in a local river. The remains showed signs of torture, with fingers, ears, toes and genitals removed, all apparently while the victims were still alive. 2 of the bodies were missing their brains, the spine had been ripped out of one. These missing pieces had all ended up in Constanzo's cauldron, but Adolfo Constanzo sought out other cartels to join, no doubt to become even more wealthy and powerful than he already was. He wanted an introduction to another powerful clan, the Hernandez family, and looked for someone to open this door for him, which, while still in 1987, brought me into contact with a woman called Sara Aldrete, who was born on September 6, 1964, in the city of Matamoros, Mexico, but she spent most of her childhood in the US, attending school in Brownsville and Texas Southmost College. She was a striking woman, standing 6 foot 1 inches tall. She was also the cousin of a drug smuggler who had ties to the Hernandez family. However, her main link to them was that one of the brothers, Elio, was obsessed with her. Constanzo realized if he could befriend her, he had an in. How the two met is unclear, but it appears Constanzo set up a chance meeting with Aldrete and drew her into his web, beginning with tarot card readings, and then her involvement in sacrifices, both animal and human. Through her, Constanzo got the introduction to the Hernandez family he wanted. Within months, Aldrete was second in command of the cult. She would use her looks and charm to recruit men from the streets. She was in charge when Constanzo was smuggling cannabis into the US. She was soon dubbed La Madrina, the godmother, whilst Constanzo was called El Padrino, the godfather. Recruits would be forced to watch the 1987 film The Believers over and over again. This film was about a psychiatrist, played by Martin Sheen, who gets drawn into a New York City-based cult that engages in human sacrifice in order to gain money and power. This movie was to get the followers used to the concept of human sacrifice. Aldrete's role would not solely be confined to recruitment. She was actively involved in the horrors to come, being at several of the murders, and directing the torture of at least one man, which we'll come to later. Constanzo impressed the members of the Hernandez crime family, to the point where he soon became their spiritual advisor. The movement of drugs between Mexico and the US would only occur with his say-so. Constanzo's involvement with the Hernandez family became even more important to them, when, in 1987, the head of the drug operation for the family, Saul Hernandez, was assassinated by a rival clan. So the new boss, Elio Hernandez, looked to Constanzo for a way to ensure his family's survival within the drug industry. The way to do this, according to Constanzo, was to sacrifice as many people as possible in order to give the family protection from their enemies. Many of the Hernandez family were drawn in by Constanzo, including Elio's nephew, Serafin Hernandez. In late 1987, Adolfo Constanzo moved his operation to a property owned by the Hernandez family called Rancho Santa Elena, 20 miles outside the city of Matamoros in the Mexican desert. This was not just a compound for Constanzo's followers, but also a hub for drug trafficking, with huge quantities of cannabis and cocaine being stored on the grounds. How many members of the narco-Satanists there actually were is unclear. The numbers vary wildly from conservative estimates of 20 to some sources saying it may have been as many as 10 times this number, although some of its members would end up being murdered and replaced. With the isolation space of the ranch, the ritualistic murders increased in frequency and brutality, all to obtain body parts for the cauldron, to summon power from evil spirits. How many people were killed at the ranch is unclear. It was at least 15. It's clear the targets chosen by Constanzo were for his own enrichment and included drug dealers as well as corrupt police officers, both working for rival cartels, thereby eliminating the Hernandez family competition. Adolfo Constanzo took a lead role in almost all of the murders. On May 28, 1988, he shot a drug dealer named Hector de la Fuente and a farmer named Moises Castillo. However, soon, according to him, the sacrifices had to be even more horrific, and that, to have the desired effect, the victims had to die screaming in agony. So, in July 1988, he supervised the torture and dismemberment of another man called Raul, a former lover of one of the cult members, whose mutilated body was dumped in the streets of Mexico City, with his organs and limbs being put in the cauldron. Another unnamed victim was dispatched in the same manner in August 1988. It should be noted here that, as with other cult leaders, the compound was seen as a way by Constanzo to wield complete control over his followers. The property was isolated, so the cult was cut off from the outside world. Travel to and from the compound was strictly controlled. The intention was only to expose cult members to other cult members, so their collective insanity would be reinforced amongst the group. Part of this shared delusion was the belief that Constanzo was somehow divine, all-powerful, and his word was law. He set various rules, including no use of drugs and no television. With regard to the last point, this was intended to cut off contact with the outside world. Of course, the rules were meant for the followers, not for Constanzo. He would regularly scurry off to drive around in his luxury cars and spend time in his luxury condominium in Mexico City. However, violation of Constanzo's rules meant death. In November 1988, Constanzo ordered the torture and murder of a man called Jorge Gomez. He used drugs, which was something that was banned. This murder was used as an example to others not to violate Constanzo's rules. In terms of what torture was used, this appears to have escalated as time went on, and apparently including an occasion where a man's penis was cut off, and his chest cut open, and his ribs pulled apart by hand, and his heart removed, while the man was still alive. It should be noted that many of the victims were anally raped, often by multiple group members, including Constanzo, over a number of hours before their deaths. On the 14th of February 1989, Constanzo ordered the torture and murder of 3 drug dealers in a single day. Their bodies were hacked apart, their bones and organs boiled in water, and the liquid consumed. Those who pleased Constanzo with their level of devotion and depravity were rewarded. For example, Elio Hernandez, the de facto leader of the Hernandez family, was ordained as an executioner priest and branded with the hot knife, with him later showing authorities the arrow that had been seared into his skin, signifying his rank. The captives would be held in a barn, where they'd be tortured. Then they'd be moved into a shed on the property, where an altar had been set up with burning candles. The ceremony would involve alcohol, and those watching the horror would scream and holler, throwing themselves around, apparently having convulsions as spirits entered their bodies. It must have been something out of a nightmare. The victim would then be dispatched. It appears that all the victims were male. The type of victim selected was apparently based on the type of spell that Constanzo wanted to perform. If he wanted to perform a spell to give a cult member strength, they would seek out a well-built man, and after his murder, his muscles would be cut away from his body and put in the pot. If he wanted to cast a spell to give someone eternal youth, then they would target children and use their body parts and blood. From what I've been able to gather, At least 2 children were amongst those murdered. One of these deaths shows the depravity of this group, as if this wasn't already clear, and their fixation on finding people to sacrifice. On the 23rd of February 1989, a corrupt police officer called Cesar Salcida was abducted and brought to the ranch for execution. However, he struggled as soon as he realized the fate that awaited him, and Elio Hernandez pulled out a gun and shot him. Constanza was displeased by this, and stated that because the victim hadn't died by torture, his body parts could not be used, and so they needed another victim. Serafin Hernandez and 2 other cult members jumped into a van and sped off looking for another target. The van drove down Mexican Federal Highway 2, which connected the ranch and the city of Matamoros, when they spotted 14-year-old Jose Luis walking on his way to feed animals at a neighbor's ranch. The boy was bundled into the van, a bag placed over his head, and he was driven back to the compound. The boy was then taken out of the van, and without removing the bag, Elio took a machete, brought it down the child's neck, decapitating him so the head fell into the bag. When he took the bag off, he saw to his horror that it was Jose Luis, his cousin. The body was promptly disposed of. On the 13th of March 1989, Adolfo Constanza declared that another human sacrifice needed to take place so that a spell could be cast to protect a shipment of illegal drugs from the authorities. Constanza specifically stated that he needed a human brain, the rationale appearing literally to be that if a brain was included in his next concoction, they'd be able to outsmart the authorities. However, Constanza was more specific. He stated he needed a brain from an American college student, as this would be bigger and more intelligent. So in the late evening, he sent his followers into the streets of Matamoros to find a victim. Mark Kilroy was the unfortunate person, out of thousands out that night, whom selected for this sacrifice. The Santa Elena compound to me sounds like the definition of hell on earth, a place of absolute horror, murder and destruction, a place where one psychopathic man directed acts of pure depravity and evil. It was this nightmare that awaited Mark on the 14th of March 1989. So, we left the story of Mark Kilroy earlier, who having been approached by 2 men, Serafin Hernandez and another cult member called Mario Torres. The men apparently spotted Mark when he was relieving himself behind a tree, and they approached him, with Mario saying, quote, "Do you want to ride?" Before he could react, the men bundled him into the van. The date was the 14th of March 1989. The time was approximately 2 a.m. Serafin was driving, but soon stopped as he needed to urinate. With the van stopped, Mark took the opportunity and managed to scramble out of the vehicle, began to run. Mark began to sprint towards a car behind them, looking for help, but instead of finding salvation, he was confronted with other cult members who were in a second backup vehicle. Mark was attacked and bundled into the car, a knife held to his throat to ensure he didn't try to escape again. The vehicle was then drove in convoy, taking Mark on his last journey and his horrific death at Rancho Santa Elena. What happened next is not known precisely, as there are different reports, but it appears the most likely sequence of events is that Mark was tied up and gagged in a barn initially. A few hours after his abduction, an aged caretaker at the ranch called Domingo Reyes spoke to Mark, gave him some water and made him some eggs, as he said he was hungry. His gag was removed so he could eat his last meal. Then the torture began, with Mark being cut, stabbed and burnt by various followers. He was also gang raped. This went on for approximately 8 to 10 hours. Leading the torture was Adolfo Constanzo, who stated was one of the men who sodomized and tortured Mark. I've read that his second in command, Sarah Aldrete, was apparently present, but it's unclear if this is the case or what her involvement actually was in the torture of Mark. It was believed that the ritual needed to be done within 13 hours of the abduction, so by 3 p.m, or the spell would not work. So just before 3 p.m, Mark Kilroy was led, blindfolded due to the duct tape over his face, with his hands behind his back, to the cabin where the executions took place. All the time he was begging for his life. Candles were lit and chanting began, and Mark was forced to lie on his stomach, but then lightly forced into a kneeling position with his neck exposed. Adolfo Constanza then took a machete and brought it down on the back of Mark's neck. Some reports indicate this decapitated him. However, the majority I've read suggest this didn't actually remove his head and instead severed his spinal column. Either way, the result was the same. Mark Kilroy, a man with a promising future, who just 13 hours ago was partying with his friends, had been sacrificed as part of the belief system of a deranged cult. As soon as Mark was dead, the group set about dismembering his body. The top of his head was cut open, and and his brain removed. His legs were also cut off above his knees to make it easier to bury him. His fingers and his penis were also removed. A wire was inserted into Mark's spinal column so that once the body had decomposed, the bones could be pulled up from the ground more easily. This was apparently so that Costanzo and other cult members could eventually wear Mark's vertebrae around their necks for good luck. Mark's brain was then taken and fed into the bubbling cauldron. A goat's head, chicken feet, a turtle shell, a horseshoe, coins and animal blood were all added. The ingredients apparently needed for Costanzo to cast a spell to protect a drug shipment. In the late morning of the 14th of March 1989, Mark Kilroy's friends were concerned. He had not returned to South Padre Island. They had not seen him now for approximately 8 hours, and they knew something was wrong. So they crossed back over the border to Mexico and reported Mark missing to the US Embassy. They were brushed off, being told that Mark had later been arrested in Mexico for some minor infraction, would soon be released, and stumbled back across the border, little worse for wear, later that day. Unsatisfied, Mark's friends crossed back into the US and filed a missing persons report with the police in Brownsville. However, when US police approached their Mexican colleagues, they refused to help them. They stated that according to their records, Mark had crossed back into the US, and so it wasn't their problem. Whether officials were covering for the activities of the cult or was simply incompetent is unclear, but the investigation into Mark's disappearance came to a grinding halt before it had even begun. It appears the only reason why Mark's disappearance was actually taken seriously was due to his uncle, who worked for US Customs, calling in favours and putting pressure on agencies on both sides of the border. This resulted in a major investigation being started. The Kilroys, their friends, and both US and Mexican police forces searched for Mark, posting 200,000 flyers in both Spanish and English all along the Rio Grande Valley. They offered a $15,000 reward for information on Mark. Mark's parents met with officials all along the border, and his case was featured on America's Most Wanted. However, it would be the stupidity of one cult member who would, luckily, bring an end to the activities of Los Narcos Satanicos, but not before 2 further human sacrifices occurred. The last of these occurred on either the 28th of March or the 1st of April 1989, and involved a man named Gilberto Souza, whose ordeal began by being hung from a beam. Sarah Aldretta then directed this man's torture, with him being lowered into a barrel of boiling water, while she told others to gossip his nipples with scissors before he was murdered. The reason why she was chosen to take the lead was apparently because Souza used to be her lover. This last sacrifice was apparently to ensure that 800 kilos of cannabis arrived in the US safely, and the specific spell using the body parts of Souza was to make the cult members literally invisible and bulletproof. Belief in this nonsense is what led to the downfall of this murderous cult. On the 9th of April 1989, Serafin Hernandez was driving back from smuggling drugs over the border when he drove straight through a roadblock which had been set up to detect drug traffickers. The armed Mexican police were stunned by his brazenness, but instead of opening fire, they decided to follow the vehicle and were led all the way back to Rancho Santa Relida. It appeared that Serafin was genuinely surprised the police could see him, and they arrested him. A quick search of the ranch revealed the presence of cannabis and cocaine and cult paraphernalia, but rather than searching too extensively, the police made a number of arrests. This included 4 cult members, amongst them Serafin Hernandez and Elio Hernandez, as well as the caretaker for the ranch, Domingo Reyes. The puzzle pieces quickly fell into place. Domingo Reyes saw a picture of Mark, confirmed that he'd been at the ranch, and he'd even spoken to him. Serafin Hernandez, who from everything I've read, was essentially brain dead, for he confessed to everything, not just the death of Mark, but multiple other murders, explained that the victims were buried at the ranch. He also identified Adolfo Constanzo and Sarah Aldretta as the ringleaders. Serafin's willingness to recount his crimes appeared to stem from him believing that because of the magic cast by Constanzo, he was immune from prosecution, so he could confess everything and there would be no consequences. I would love to have been in the room with him when it dawned on him he'd put the nails in his own coffin. On April the 11th, 1989, the police descended on the ranch and the horror of Los Narcos Satanicos was finally revealed. Over the next 5 days, the grounds of the ranch were excavated, as well as a nearby orchard, also owned by the Hernandez family. The bodies of 15 men were eventually recovered, including the horrifically mutilated body of Mark Kilroy, which was found on the first day. All of the corpses showed signs of prolonged torture and were missing various parts of their bodies, including ears, noses, limbs and their genitals. Others showed signs that their chests had been pulled open and their hearts and other internal organs removed. Police also recovered Constanza's cauldron, which was brewing with blood, spiders, scorpions, a dead black cat, a turtle shell, bones, deer antlers, and pieces of a human brain, Mark's brain. In the shack where the executions took place, the police found blood caking the walls and floor, and, along with bones and clumps of human hair and skin, they found an altar, unused candles, and broken bottles of alcohol. Human skulls, bones and teeth were found scattered throughout the property. A federale asked Serafin, who was ordered to direct them around the property, why he had removed Mark's brain, and he responded nonchalantly, quote, "It was our religion." The discovery at the ranch meant the call had to be made to James and Helen Kilroy to tell them the fate of their son. The horror in this case is beyond belief. It wasn't just bad enough that their child had been murdered, but the nature of his death was so brutal, so unnecessary. However, the bravery of this pair is amazing, and I'll return to them later. Adolfo Constanza was tipped off about the police activity at the ranch, so he, Sarah Aldretta, and 3 other followers fled and holed up at the apartments of a sympathetic mother and her children in Mexico City. The remaining loyalists included Constanza's bodyguard, a man called Martin Quintana, as well as another man called Alvaro Valdez, professional hitman. They were also heavily armed. Aldretta, knowing that the writing was on the wall, began to plot her defense. She was going to claim that she was an innocent victim that had been kidnapped by the cult. On the 2nd of May 1989, she dropped a note from the window of the apartment block, which read, quote, "Please call the judicial police and tell them that in this building are those they are seeking. Give them the address, 4th floor. Tell them that a woman is being held hostage. I beg for this, because what I want most is to talk, or they're going to kill the girl." A passerby found the note, and thinking it was a joke, discarded it. On May the 6th, 1989, neighbours called the police about a loud argument to the apartment Constanza was holed up in, as well as thinking they heard gunshots. Police attended and were instantly met with gunfire. This led to a 45-minute gun battle, where miraculously, only 1 police officer was injured. With the walls closing in, Constanzo issued his last orders. He told Valdez to kill both him and his bodyguard, Martin Quintana. Valdez lists describe what happened next. Quote, "I told him I couldn't do it, but he hit me in the face and threatened me that everything would go bad for me in hell. Then he hugged Martin, and I just stood in front of them and shot them with a machine gun." The monster that was Adolfo Constanzo was dead. He was just 26 years old. The police eventually broke in and took a picture of the scene inside the property before arresting all those left alive in the flat. With Adolfo Constanzo dead, his followers were left to face the music alone. In total, 14 cultures were indicted on various charges, including multiple murder, weapons and narcotics violations, and obstruction of justice. We'll focus on the outcome of the main antagonists. In August 1990, Alvaro Valdez was convicted of killing Adolfo Constanzo and Martin Quintana, and he was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. On the 3rd of May 1994, Elio Hernandez and Serafin Hernandez were both convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to 67 years imprisonment. However, this was then reduced to 50 years imprisonment in 1998, with it being argued that this was the maximum sentence that could be imposed for capital murder in Mexico at the time. I've left Sarah Aldretta until last. Despite being identified by several cult members as Constanza's second-in-command and heavily involved in the murders, she denied her guilt, claiming that she was an innocent victim because she had been kidnapped and tortured by the cult. The authorities didn't believe her lies, and in 1994, she was sent to prison for 45 years for her role in the atrocities of the narco-Satanists. She has continued to protest her innocence ever since, and in around 2008, she released a book giving her apparent side of the story. Bizarrely, she was actually allowed to do press conferences about the book and earn money from it. You can still buy an autographed copy today. However, she can bang on about her innocence all she wants, from her prison cell, where she remains to this day. If she's ever released, the American authorities will be waiting to prosecute her for her role in the murder of Mark Kilroy. bravery of James and Helen Kilroy is remarkable. They didn't crumble after the death of their son. It appears their faith was pivotal to this, with their believing their son was now in heaven and they would join him one day. They decided to spend their remaining time on Earth trying to do some good and keep their son's memory and name alive. And that is exactly what they did. The Mark Kilroy Foundation is still going today, over 30 years later. The website states, quote, "The mission is to provide anti-drug scholarships, at-risk youth intervention, and summer programs." I'll leave a link to the website in the description. If you could donate your time or money, then please do so. Total respect for James and Helen. I'm sure Mark would be very proud. This is an extremely interesting and terrifying case. The headline is that Adolfo Constanzo was a sadistic psychopath and a master manipulator. I can imagine his name is not well known to many of you, but I believe that he should be held up as one of the most evil cult leaders of all time. The thing about Constanzo, which stands out when looking at this case, is just how powerful he was. He died when he was only 26 years old, and he was one of the most powerful figures in the Mexican underworld. Literally, drug shipments would not cross the border without his say-so. Gang bosses and even hardened assassins would not act without his blessing. But what created this monster? The starting point is his mother Delia. In terms of neglectful and problematic parenting, she pretty much sits on top of the pile. From the moment that Constanzo was born, she continuously told him that he was special, above everyone else. He was exposed to things that children should never see, and as I said earlier in the video, it appears that his earliest memories were murdering animals, and this was celebrated. Killing was good, and I've no doubt that Constanzo liked having this power of life and death over another living being. Delia also introduced her son to beliefs which seem to stem entirely from evil. I've no real indication anywhere in what I've read about Constanzo that any part of his childhood was not characterized by darkness, a belief in the power of evil, and the way to progress in the world was by harming others. Nothing in his childhood would have come close to teaching Constanzo about empathy for others or enabled him to develop a conscience. So, before he was even a teenager, we had a child whose upbringing was characterized by blood and death, whose mother had told him he was the chosen one. An important question is whether Constanzo believed any of this nonsense. We will never know, but I doubt it. He was both intelligent and a scarily efficient manipulator and tactician. I think he saw an opportunity to take advantage of a country where belief in magic and mysticism is commonplace. I read a recent article which says that approximately a third of Mexicans believe in magic and its ability to influence their lives, and it seems this was far higher in the 1970s and 1980s. I think that Constanzo saw that by using these beliefs, he could gain two things: power and money. He quickly realized he could essentially say whatever he wanted, and people would pay him vast amounts of money. He was shrewd, so I've no doubt before any of his wealthy patrons sat down in front of him, he knew exactly what they wanted to hear. The fact that he, as a young man, was sitting opposite people who were supposedly educated and was duping them into handing over wads of cash likely meant that his perception of superiority was increased. Eventually, he would have hardened gangsters, killers, likely double his age, cowering at his feet, begging for his guidance. However, the big money was in drugs, and he tried to muscle in on this. He approached one family. They refused, so he directed his rabid followers to eliminate them. When he got his foot in the door with the Hernandez cartel, he knew he was set. He could indulge his murderous impulses whilst also making as much money for himself as possible. He convinced that in order to protect their drug shipments, they needed to slaughter as many people as possible, and I've no doubt that Constanzo felt a sense of ultimate power, making his proclamations and watching his followers scurry off to bring him any number of victims he wanted. The screams of his victims likely had nothing to do with his spells. It was all about him. He wanted to hear the terror in their voices, to watch them tortured, to take their lives, dismember their bodies. Potentially, this gave him a sexual thrill. It appears that the unholy concoction he produced was drunk by his followers, and I imagine he sat there. I was amazed by the fact that with a single word from him, his cult would guzzle liquid, which I imagine must have tasted foul, and had pieces of flesh and brain floating in it. Another reason why I don't think Constanzo believed any of the bullshit was his choice of target. Many of the people he killed were rivals of the Hernandez family, or corrupt police officers who stood in his way. He also eliminated at least one cult member who defied him. In this respect, it's clear that his directions to kill, apparently from some higher power, always aligned with his own self-interest. In addition, as soon as the heat was on, he fled. He clearly didn't believe his spells gave him protection from the authorities. He wasn't an idiot. When he was cornered, like so many other cult leaders and mass shooters, he chose to commit suicide. There was no way this narcissist would have allowed himself to be shackled, paraded before the courts, and portrayed as a murderer, a common criminal. He was far above that, and so he used his power one last time and ordered his own execution. His death means we'll never know how many people Constanzo's cult murdered. Although 15 bodies were found at the property, it's believed the group killed around 26, but likely many, many more. All of these victims due to one sadistic psychopath and his ability to manipulate others. However, going further than this case reinforces the horrifying fact that some people are willing to blindly follow the ramblings of madmen. In the picturesque coastal town of Millhaven, where the salty breeze carries whispers of secrets and lies, a tragedy was brewing beneath the surface of everyday life. The quaint streets, lined with colorful boutiques and cozy cafes, masked a web of deceit that would soon unravel, leaving the community shaken to its core. At the heart of this tale are three individuals whose lives became inextricably intertwined. Lachlan Thorne, a man desperate for financial stability and respect. Zara Callahan, a talented chef with dreams bigger than the small town could contain. And Enzo Rossi, the charismatic owner of a popular Italian restaurant. To the outside world, Lachlan and Zara appeared to be the perfect couple, young and in love with a bright future ahead. Their engagement was the talk of the town, a beacon of hope in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming in their relationship, cracks that would soon split wide open. Enzo, with his easy charm and successful business, seemed to have it all. His restaurant was a local institution, and his marriage to Vivian, a respected member of the town council, was envied by many. Yet, behind closed doors, Enzo harbored his own dissatisfactions and desires. As summer faded into autumn, the stage was set for a series of events that would lead to betrayal, blackmail, and ultimately, bloodshed. The story of how these three lives collided is a cautionary tale of passion, greed, and the devastating consequences of keeping secrets in a town where the truth always finds its way to the surface. Lachlan Thorne's story began far from the shores of Millhaven, in a struggling mining town where dreams went to die. The youngest of 4 children, Lachlan grew up watching his father descend into the depths of the earth day after day, only to return home beaten down by the relentless toil. His mother, a part-time seamstress, struggled to keep the family afloat, her fingers constantly pricked by needles as she worked late into the night. From an early age, Lachlan vowed he would escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped his parents. He threw himself into his studies, earning a scholarship to a prestigious university in the city. But the transition from his humble beginnings to the world of academia proved more challenging than he anticipated. Surrounded by wealthy peers who seemed to navigate college life with ease, Lachlan felt like an outsider, constantly battling the feeling that he didn't belong. Despite his best efforts, Lachlan's insecurities began to manifest in self-destructive behaviors. He developed a gambling habit, convinced that one big win could solve all his problems. Instead, it left him deeper in debt, forcing him to take on multiple part-time jobs just to stay afloat. By the time he graduated, the promise of a bright future had dimmed considerably. Lachlan drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing in the corporate world. His resume became a patchwork of short-term positions and gaps, each failure chipping away at his self-esteem. As his 30th birthday approached, he found himself back in a small town, not unlike the one he had tried so hard to escape. It was in Millhaven that Lachlan's luck seemed to change. He landed a job as a marketing manager for a local brewery, a position that finally allowed him to showcase his skills. More importantly, it was here that he met Zara Callahan. Their whirlwind romance offered Lachlan a glimpse of the life he had always dreamed of. Successful, respected, and loved. When he proposed to Zara after just 6 months of dating, Lachlan truly believed he had finally overcome his past, but old habits die hard, and the pressure to provide Zara with the life he thought she deserved began to weigh heavily on him. As wedding plans progressed, Lachlan found himself once again drawn to the false promise of easy money, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to tragedy. Zara Callahan's journey to Millhaven was paved with both passion and pain. Born to a free-spirited mother and an absent father, Zara spent her childhood bouncing between relatives' homes and short-term apartments. Her mother, Fiona, was a talented artist, but struggled with substance abuse, leaving young Zara to fend for herself more often than not. It was during one of their stays with Zara's maternal grandmother that she discovered her love for cooking. In her grandmother's warm, fragrant kitchen, Zara found solace and stability. She would spend hours watching the elderly woman transform simple ingredients into mouth-watering dishes, soaking up every technique and family recipe like a sponge. As Zara entered her teenage years, her mother's addiction worsened. At 15, Zara made the difficult decision to leave her mother's care, moving in permanently with her grandmother. It was a choice that haunted her, but one that allowed her to focus on her dreams. She threw herself into her culinary pursuits, working part-time at local restaurants while excelling in her high school's home economics classes. Zara's talent didn't go unnoticed. She earned a scholarship to a prestigious culinary school, where she honed her skills and developed her own unique style. Her instructors praised her innovative approach to traditional dishes, and her fellow students admired her dedication and creativity. However, just as Zara was about to graduate, tragedy struck. Her grandmother passed away suddenly, leaving Zara feeling unmoored once again. Grief-stricken and unsure of her next move, she deferred her dreams of working in a big city restaurant and returned to her grandmother's house in Millhaven. It was meant to be temporary, just long enough to settle her grandmother's affairs. But when she heard that the renowned restaurant was hiring, Zara saw an opportunity to gain experience while figuring out her next steps. She impressed Enzo Rossi with her skills and passion, and what was supposed to be a short-term position turned into years. Zara threw herself into her work, quickly rising through the ranks to become the restaurant's sous chef. She found a sense of family among her co-workers and began to put down roots in Millhaven. When she met Lachlan, it seemed like the final piece of her life was falling into place. Little did she know that the stability she had worked so hard to achieve was about to be shattered by a web of desire, deceit, and desperation. The restaurant stood as a testament to Enzo Rossi's unwavering ambition and culinary expertise. The restaurant, with its warm terracotta walls and the intoxicating aroma of authentic Italian cuisine, had been Enzo's dream since he first set foot in Millhaven 20 years ago. A first-generation immigrant, Enzo had arrived with little more than a suitcase full of his nonna's recipes and an unshakable determination to succeed. The early years were a struggle, with Enzo working grueling hours to establish his restaurant's reputation. His charm and culinary skills gradually won over the initially skeptical locals, and the restaurant became the go-to spot for everything from first dates to golden wedding anniversaries. Enzo took pride in knowing his regular customers by name, always ready with a warm smile and a perfectly paired wine recommendation. It was during this period of growing success that Enzo met Vivian, a local girl from a well-respected family. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that was the talk of Millhaven for months. Vivian, with her sharp business acumen, helped streamline the restaurant's operations, allowing Enzo to focus on what he loved most, creating exquisite dishes in the kitchen. On the surface, Enzo appeared to have it all: a thriving business, a beautiful wife, and the respect of the community. He became a pillar of Millhaven society, sponsoring local events and mentoring aspiring chefs at the high school. His annual charity dinners were legendary, raising substantial funds for various community projects. However, as the years passed, cracks began to appear in Enzo's seemingly perfect life. The long hours at the restaurant took their toll on his marriage. Vivian, now deeply involved in local politics, had less and less time for the romantic gestures that had once characterized their relationship. Their conversations, once filled with dreams and laughter, became focused on business strategies and social obligations. Enzo found himself increasingly restless, yearning for the passion that seemed to have faded from his life. He threw himself into his work, constantly innovating and expanding the restaurant's menu. But even his beloved kitchen began to feel like a gilded cage. trapping him in a life that no longer brought him joy. As he approached his 50th birthday, Enzo felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. He began to question the choices that had led him to this point, wondering if he had sacrificed too much of himself in pursuit of success. It was in this state of emotional vulnerability that Enzo first began to see Zara as more than just his talented sous chef, setting the stage for a relationship that would have far-reaching and ultimately tragic consequences. The spark between Enzo and Zara ignited on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening in late autumn. The restaurant was uncharacteristically quiet, with only a handful of patrons braving the stormy weather. As closing time approached, Enzo found himself alone in the kitchen with Zara, both of them working in comfortable silence to prepare for the next day. It was Zara who broke the quiet, suggesting a new twist on one of the restaurant's classic dishes. Enzo, intrigued, invited her to demonstrate. As they worked side by side, chopping herbs and sautéing vegetables, Enzo was struck by Zara's passion and creativity. Her eyes lit up as she explained her ideas, and Enzo found himself drawn in not just by her culinary skills, but by her vibrant energy. As they tasted the finished dish together, their eyes met over the steaming plate. In that moment, something shifted between them. Enzo, caught off guard by the intensity of his feelings, made a casual comment about the late hour and suggested they call it a night. But as Zara gathered her things to leave, a clap of thunder startled her, causing her to drop her bag. Enzo rushed to help, and as they both reached for the scattered contents, their hands touched. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt through both of them. Before either could fully process what was happening, they found themselves in each other's arms, sharing a passionate kiss that left them both breathless and confused. In the days that followed, Enzo and Zara tried to maintain a professional distance, but the tension between them was palpable. Stolen glances across the kitchen, lingering touches as they passed each other in the narrow hallways. It was only a matter of time before they gave in to their desires. Their first real encounter happened after hours in Enzo's office. What started as a discussion about the next season's menu quickly evolved into a heated expression of their pent-up passion. As they lay tangled together on the small leather sofa, both Enzo and Zara knew they had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. For Zara, the affair was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The exhilaration of being with Enzo was constantly at war with her guilt over betraying Lachlan. She told herself it was just a physical thing, that her feelings for her fiancé remained unchanged. But as the weeks passed, she found herself increasingly drawn to Enzo, not just physically but emotionally as well. Enzo, for his part, felt rejuvenated by the relationship. With Zara, he rediscovered the passion he had been missing both in and out of the kitchen. He convinced himself that he deserved this happiness, that the years of dedication to his wife and his business entitled him to this secret indulgence. As summer turned to fall, their affair deepened, becoming more than just stolen moments of physical intimacy. Neither Enzo nor Zara were prepared for the storm that was brewing, threatening to destroy everything they had built. Lachlan Thorne prided himself on his ability to read people, a skill honed through years of navigating the corporate world. So when Zara's behavior began to change subtly, he noticed, it started with small things. She was working later hours, seemed distracted during their time together, and was constantly checking her phone. At first, Lachlan attributed it to the stress of wedding planning and her increased responsibilities at the restaurant. But as the weeks passed, a nagging suspicion began to take root in his mind. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, ostensibly watching a movie together, Lachlan observed Zara smiling at her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed out a message. When he casually asked who she was texting, Zara's response was too quick, too rehearsed. "A coworker?" she said, discussing a new recipe. But the flush on her cheeks and the way she quickly locked her phone told a different story. Determined to uncover the truth, Lachlan began to pay closer attention to Zara's schedule and movements. He noted the nights she came home particularly late, the weekends she claimed to be doing inventory at the restaurant. He even drove by the restaurant a few times, noting with growing unease that Zara's car was often the only one in the parking lot, besides Enzo's distinctive vintage Alfa Romeo. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a crisp autumn evening. Lachlan, unable to shake his suspicions, decided to surprise Zara at work. As he approached the restaurant, he saw two figures silhouetted in the dim light of the kitchen. Through the window, he watched in stunned silence as Enzo pulled Zara close, their lips meeting in a passionate kiss. The sight hit Lachlan like a physical blow. He stumbled back to his car, his mind reeling. All the little inconsistencies, the late nights, the distracted behavior. It all made sense now. The woman he loved, the woman he had planned to spend his life with, was having an affair with her boss. As he sat in his car watching the restaurant, a toxic mixture of emotions coursed through him. Hurt, betrayal, anger, but also surprisingly a cold calculation. Lachlan had always prided himself on his ability to turn situations to his advantage, and as the initial shock wore off, his mind began to work. He thought about the upcoming wedding, the deposits they had already paid. He thought about the shame of calling it off, of admitting to friends and family that he had been deceived. And then he thought about the restaurant, about Enzo's wealth and success. A plan began to form in Lachlan's mind. If Zara thought she could betray him and get away with it, she was sorely mistaken. He would make her pay quite literally, and in doing so, he would secure the financial stability he had always craved. As he started his car and drove away from the restaurant, Lachlan's hurt and betrayal hardened into resolve. Zara's infidelity would be her downfall, and his ticket to the life he deserved. Lachlan bided his time, carefully planning his next move. He needed irrefutable evidence before confronting Zara. Over the next week, he meticulously documented her comings and goings, even going so far as to plant a small voice-activated recorder in her car. It was an invasion of privacy that made him feel dirty, but he justified it as necessary, given the circumstances. When he finally had what he needed, a recording of Zara and Enzo in an intimate conversation that left no doubt about their relationship, Lachlan set his plan in motion. He chose a quiet Sunday morning, when Zara was relaxed and off guard, to spring his trap. "Lachlan, I know about you and Enzo," he said without preamble as Zara sipped her coffee. The mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. Her face, drained of color, told him everything he needed to know. What followed was a conversation filled with tears, recriminations, and desperate pleas. Zara begged for forgiveness, swearing that the affair meant nothing, that Lachlan was the one she truly loved. But Lachlan had steeled himself against her explanations. He laid out his terms coldly. If she wanted to keep their engagement intact and avoid the scandal of her affair being exposed, she would have to do exactly as he said. His demands were simple yet devastating. Zara would use her position at the restaurant to embezzle money, skimming from the daily takings and manipulating the books to cover her tracks. The amount would start small but increase over time. Lachlan framed it as restitution, compensation for the hurt and humiliation she had caused him. Zara, caught between her guilt and her fear of losing everything, reluctantly agreed. She rationalized that it would be temporary, that she could find a way out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But deep down, she knew she had set foot on a dangerous path. The scheme began slowly. Zara, leveraging her trusted position and her access to the restaurant's financial systems, started by pocketing small amounts from the cash register, no more than $50 at a time. She meticulously altered the daily reports, adjusting inventory numbers and falsifying receipts to cover her tracks. Each time she handed the stolen money to Lachlan, she felt a piece of her soul crumble away. Lachlan, for his part, treated the whole affair with a chilling detachment. He set up a separate bank account to deposit the stolen funds, careful to keep the transactions below amounts that might trigger suspicion. To the outside world, he played the role of the doting fiancé, but in private, he was cold and demanding, constantly pressing Zara for more. As weeks turned into months, the amounts grew larger. Lachlan's appetite for money seemed insatiable, and Zara found herself taking greater risks to meet his demands. She began to manipulate the payroll, creating ghost employees and diverting their salaries. She falsified supplier invoices, pocketing the difference between the actual and inflated costs. The stress of maintaining the deception took its toll on Zara. She lost weight, dark circles forming under her eyes from sleepless nights spent agonizing over her actions. Her once bubbly personality became subdued, her passion for cooking diminishing, as the kitchen she once loved became a constant reminder of her betrayal. Lachlan, however, thrived. The influx of cash allowed him to pay off his gambling debts and even start making risky investments in the stock market. He began to dress better, drive a newer car, and talk about purchasing a house, all under the guise of planning for their future together. As the wedding date approached, Zara found herself trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The thought of marrying Lachlan filled her with dread. but she saw no way out. She had committed crimes, betrayed not only her fiancé, but also Enzo and the restaurant that had given her a chance. The weight of her actions pressed down on her, making each day a struggle to maintain the facade of normality. Little did Zara know that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. Enzo, sharp-eyed and attentive to his business, had begun to notice discrepancies in the books. The confrontation that was brewing would set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Enzo Rossi had built his restaurant empire on attention to detail, and it was this meticulous nature that first alerted him to the problem. Small inconsistencies in the daily reports, slight discrepancies in the inventory. Individually, they were easy to overlook, but collectively, they painted a troubling picture. At first, Enzo attributed the errors to simple mistakes or software glitches. He spent long nights poring over spreadsheets, trying to reconcile the numbers, but as the discrepancies continued to mount, a sinking feeling settled in his stomach. Someone was stealing from him, and given the nature of the manipulations, it had to be someone with intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations. His suspicions inevitably turned to Zara. She had access to all the systems, and the changes had begun around the time their affair started. The thought that she might be betraying him professionally as well as personally was almost too much to bear. Enzo chose a quiet afternoon to confront Zara, calling her into his office under the pretense of discussing a new menu. As soon as the door closed behind her, the facade dropped. He laid out the evidence he had gathered, watching her face carefully for any reaction. Zara's world seemed to crumble around her. Caught between her loyalty to Enzo and her fear of Lachlan, she broke down, confessing everything through a flood of tears. She told Enzo about Lachlan's discovery of their affair, the blackmail, and the escalating demands for money. Enzo listened in stunned silence, a maelstrom of emotions raging within him. Anger at the betrayal warred with concern for Zara, and fear for his own reputation. The revelation of the theft was bad enough, but if word of their affair got out, it would destroy not only his marriage, but also the carefully cultivated image he had built in the community. In the end, self-preservation won out. Enzo made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He wouldn't go to the police. The risk of exposure was too great. Instead, he would handle this internally. He demanded that Zara end things with Lachlan immediately and return every cent that had been stolen. In return, he would keep quiet about her crimes. What Enzo didn't realize was that his decision to keep the police out of it would set in motion a dangerous chain of events. Lachlan, already teetering on the edge of desperation, would not take kindly to having his source of money cut off. And Zara, caught between two men and her own guilt, was a ticking time bomb of emotions. As Zara left Enzo's office, both of them believed they had found a solution. In reality, they had merely set the stage for a confrontation that would end in tragedy. In the days following her confrontation with Enzo, Zara felt as if she were walking on a tightrope, constantly on the verge of losing her balance. She knew she had to end things with Lachlan, but the thought filled her with dread. Lachlan had already shown how far he was willing to go to get what he wanted, and she feared his reaction to being cut off. Lachlan, oblivious to the shift in dynamics, continued to press Zara for more money. His demands had become increasingly erratic. Fueled by early success in his stock market gambles, he talked of quitting his job, of investing full-time, painting pictures of a lavish future that made Zara's stomach churn with anxiety. When Zara finally gathered the courage to confront Lachlan, the conversation quickly spiraled out of control. She told him about Enzo's discovery, her voice shaking as she explained that there would be no more money. Lachlan's reaction was explosive. He raged at her, accusing her of choosing Enzo over him, threatening to expose their affair and her theft to the entire town. In a moment of desperation, Zara blurted out that Enzo already knew about the affair, that he had chosen to keep it quiet to protect his own reputation. It was the wrong thing to say. Lachlan's anger transformed into a cold, calculating fury. If Enzo was willing to cover up the theft to hide the affair, Lachlan reasoned, then perhaps there was still a way to profit from the situation. Over the next few days, Lachlan began to formulate a new plan. He started showing up at the restaurant during busy hours, making vague comments within earshot of staff and customers. He sent anonymous letters to Vivian, hinting at her husband's infidelity without providing concrete details. Each move was designed to ratchet up the pressure on Enzo, to push him towards a breaking point. Zara watched this unfolding disaster with a sense of helpless dread. She tried to warn Enzo, but he was already retreating into himself, becoming paranoid and short-tempered. The once bustling kitchen of the restaurant became a pressure cooker of tension, with staff picking up on the strained atmosphere between Enzo and Zara. As Lachlan's actions became bolder, Enzo's grip on the situation began to slip. He started drinking heavily, making careless mistakes in the kitchen. Vivian, picking up on the whispers and her husband's strange behavior, became increasingly suspicious and confrontational. The carefully constructed lives of all involved were unraveling at an alarming rate. It was clear that something had to give, but no one could have predicted the violent culmination that was about to unfold in the very place where it all began, the kitchen of the restaurant. The night that changed everything started like any other at the restaurant. The dining room hummed with the chatter of patrons, the clink of cutlery against fine china, and the soft strains of Italian music. But in the kitchen, the atmosphere was charged with an almost palpable tension. Enzo had been drinking since the afternoon, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as he barked orders at his staff. Zara worked silently at her station, her eyes constantly darting to the door, dreading Lachlan's now nightly appearance to taunt them. It was just past 9 when Lachlan pushed through the kitchen doors, his face flushed with a dangerous combination of alcohol and bravado. "Enzo, you and I need to have a chat," he announced loudly, causing several of the kitchen staff to pause in their work. Enzo, his patience already worn thin, gestured sharply for Lachlan to follow him into the small office adjacent to the kitchen. Zara, her heart pounding, trailed after them, determined to prevent the confrontation she had been fearing. The next few minutes were a blur of shouting and accusations. Lachlan, emboldened by drink, laid out his demands, a substantial sum of money in exchange for his silence. Enzo, equally inebriated, refused, his face purpling with rage as he yelled at Lachlan to get out of his restaurant. Zara tried to intervene, pleading with both men to calm down, to think rationally. But her words fell on deaf ears. The situation escalated rapidly, with Lachlan grabbing a knife from a nearby prep table and Enzo lunging for the gun he kept hidden in his desk drawer for emergencies. What happened next would be debated in the courts for months to come. In the chaos of the moment, with Zara screaming for them to stop, a shot rang out. The bullet, whether by intent or accident, struck Lachlan in the chest. He staggered backward, a look of shock on his face before crumpling to the floor. The kitchen erupted into pandemonium. Staff members rushed in, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone called for an ambulance, while others tried to stem the flow of blood from Lachlan's wound. Enzo stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, as the full impact of what had just occurred washed over him. Zara, in a state of shock, found herself mechanically reciting the events to the police officers who arrived on the scene. She watched as Lachlan was stretchered out, his fate uncertain, and as Enzo was led away in handcuffs, still protesting that it had been self-defense. As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the weight of her role in the tragedy began to sink in. Her affair with Enzo, her agreement to Lachlan's blackmail scheme, her failure to come clean earlier, all of it had led to this moment. The life she had carefully built in Millhaven lay in ruins around her, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The shot fired in the kitchen of the restaurant that night echoed far beyond its walls, setting in motion a series of events that would captivate and horrify the small coastal town for years to come. In the days following the shooting, Millhaven found itself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight. News vans lined the streets, reporters eager for any morsel of information about the tragedy that had unfolded in the town's beloved Italian restaurant. The investigation moved quickly, with detectives piecing together the complex web of relationships and motivations that had led to that fateful night. Zara, racked with guilt and exhaustion, provided a full confession, detailing the affair, the blackmail, and the theft. Her cooperation proved crucial in unraveling the full extent of the situation. Lachlan, having survived the initial shooting, clung to life in the intensive care unit of Millhaven General Hospital. As he recovered, he too began to talk, his version of events largely corroborating Zara's account, though colored by his own perspective of victimhood. Enzo, initially held on attempted murder charges, maintained his claim of self-defense. The discovery of the knife near where Lachlan had fallen lent some credence to his story, but the circumstances surrounding the confrontation complicated matters. As the details of the case became public, the town reeled from the revelations. The image of the restaurant as a charming family restaurant was shattered, replaced by lurid tales of adultery, and financial crimes. Vivian, devastated by her husband's infidelity and the public humiliation, filed for divorce and resigned from her position on the town council. The employees of the restaurant found themselves suddenly out of work, as the restaurant was closed indefinitely, its future uncertain. Many in the town felt betrayed, their trust in people they had considered pillars of the community irreparably damaged. As the case moved towards trial, plea negotiations began behind the scenes. Prosecutors, aware of the complexities of the case and the potential for a lengthy, sensational trial, were open to deals that would avoid a public spectacle. Zara, advised by her lawyer and hoping to avoid a harsh sentence, agreed to testify against both Lachlan and Enzo in exchange for leniency. Lachlan, facing charges of extortion and conspiracy, sought a similar arrangement, eager to paint himself as a victim of circumstance rather than an instigator. Enzo, however, remained adamant about his innocence, insisting on his right to a trial. His defense team began to construct a narrative of a hard-working businessman driven to desperate measures by threats and blackmail. As the legal machinery ground forward, the residents of Millhaven were left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy. Trust had been broken, reputations shattered, and the very fabric of the community tested. The true cost of the events at the restaurant, it seemed, would be paid not just by those directly involved, but by the entire town. The jury, while sympathetic to the pressures he had faced, couldn't overlook the fact that he had escalated the confrontation by producing a gun. He was sentenced to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Zara Callahan, in exchange for her testimony and full cooperation, received a suspended sentence and probation for her role in the embezzlement scheme. The judge, taking into account her remorse and the coercion she had faced, opted for leniency. However, her career in the culinary world was effectively over, her reputation irreparably tarnished. Lachlan Thorne, who survived the shooting but was left with permanent injuries, pleaded guilty to extortion and blackmail charges. He received a 5-year prison sentence, with the judge noting the calculated nature of his actions and the devastating consequences they had wrought. The restaurant never reopened its doors. The building stood empty for years, a stark reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. At the heart of this story are two couples. Isabella and Russell Hawthorne, both in their early 50s, had been fixtures of the community for over 2 decades. They were the couple everyone looked up to. Successful, well-respected, and seemingly happily married, their home was often the center of neighborhood gatherings. Just 3 houses down, the newly wedded Zara and Eric Donovan had recently moved in. Both in their mid-20s, they brought a youthful energy to the street that had long been dominated by older families and retirees. Their arrival was met with curiosity and warmth by their neighbors, particularly the Hawthorns. Little did anyone know that the lives of these 4 individuals would soon become entangled in a web of desire, obsession, and murder. What began as a daring experiment in sexual exploration would spiral into a nightmare that would leave one dead, one behind bars, and 2 others grappling with the consequences of their choices. This is the story of how a seemingly innocent proposition led to a brutal crime that would be splashed across national headlines and forever change the lives of those involved. It's a cautionary tale of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming individuals and the devastating consequences of stepping outside societal norms. Isabella Hawthorne had always been the golden girl. Growing up in Seattle, she was the captain of her high school cheerleading squad, prom queen and valedictorian. But Isabella was more than just a pretty face. She had a sharp mind and boundless ambition. She met Russell Hawthorne during her sophomore year at the University of Washington. Russell, 2 years her senior, was the star quarterback with a bright future ahead of him. Their courtship was the stuff of campus legend, the perfect couple that everyone envied. They married shortly after Isabella's graduation, with dreams of conquering the world together. Russell's promising football career was cut short by a knee injury in his first year as a professional player. He pivoted to sports management, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Isabella, meanwhile, pursued a career in marketing, her creativity and drive making her a rising star in the field. Their move coincided with the birth of their daughter, Lily. They threw themselves into parenthood and their careers with equal fervor. From the outside, they seemed to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But as the years went by, cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Russell's work kept him away from home for longer stretches, and he began to put on weight, losing the athletic physique that had first attracted Isabella. For her part, Isabella found herself increasingly restless. With Lily away at college, the house felt empty, and her job no longer provided the satisfaction it once did. Isabella began to wonder if this was all there was to life. She started yoga classes and joined a book club, searching for something to fill the growing void she felt. She found herself envying the young couples she saw, with their passionate embraces and carefree laughter. When was the last time she and Russell had shared such moments? Russell, oblivious to his wife's discontent, continued his routine of long hours at the office, followed by evenings in front of the TV with a beer in hand. Their conversations became perfunctory, limited to discussions about bills, home maintenance, and occasional updates about Lily. As her 50th birthday approached, Isabella felt a growing sense of panic. Was this how she would spend the rest of her life? The woman who had once been voted most likely to succeed now felt trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. It was in this state of mind that Isabella first laid eyes on Eric Donovan. Young, handsome, with a lean swimmer's build, Eric represented everything that was missing from Isabella's life: excitement, passion, and the promise of adventure. For the first time in years, Isabella felt a stirring of desire. As she watched Eric and his young wife Zara move into the neighborhood, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that would change everything. Zara Donovan, born Zara Khalil, was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had settled in Portland 2 decades earlier. Growing up, she had always felt caught between two worlds: the traditional values of her parents and the liberal, free-spirited culture of the Pacific Northwest. With her olive skin, Zara stood out in a city that was predominantly white. From a young age, Zara showed a passion for art. Her parents, while supportive, always emphasized the importance of a practical career. As a compromise, Zara studied graphic design at Portland State University, finding a way to merge her creative instincts with a marketable skill. It was during her final year at PSU that Zara met Eric Donovan. She was working on her thesis project at a local coffee shop when Eric, a barista there, struck up a conversation about her sketches. Eric, with his easy charm and boyish good looks, immediately captured Zara's attention. Eric had grown up in a small town in rural Oregon, the youngest of 4 boys in a working-class family. He'd moved to Portland 3 years earlier, drawn by the city's vibrant art scene and progressive culture. While he worked as a barista to pay the bills, his true passion was photography. His Instagram account, filled with moody black and white portraits in stark urban landscapes, had a modest but growing following. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within weeks of their first meeting, Eric and Zara were inseparable. They spent their days exploring Portland's hidden gems, secret gardens, underground art galleries, hole-in-the-wall music venues. Eric introduced Zara to urban exploration, and she in turn taught him about Lebanese cuisine and culture. To Zara, Eric represented freedom and self-expression. He encouraged her to pursue her art without compromise, to break free from the expectations of her family and society. With Eric, Zara felt seen and understood in a way she never had before. For Eric, Zara was his muse and his anchor. Her quiet strength and unwavering support gave him the confidence to pursue his photography more seriously. He began to book small gigs, weddings, local band promotional shots, even a few magazine spreads. Their decision to get married came as a surprise to many who knew them. Both sets of parents expressed concern about the speed of their relationship, but Eric and Zara were convinced they had found their soulmates. They had a small ceremony in a sculpture garden, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The move was a practical decision. As freelancers, they needed a space that could serve as both home and studio. The quiet suburb offered affordable housing, close enough to the city for work opportunities. They saw it as the perfect place to start their life together, envisioning lazy Sunday mornings in their backyard and cozy evenings planning their future. Little did they know that their new neighborhood held secrets and temptations that would test the strength of their young love. As they unpacked boxes in their new home, neither Eric nor Zara could have imagined the turmoil that lay ahead or the devastating consequences their choices would have. The annual summer block party was a tradition that dated back decades. Every year on the last Saturday of August, Sycamore Lane would transform into a bustling fairground of sorts. Neighbors would bring out grills, coolers full of drinks, and folding tables laden with potluck dishes. Children would run around with water guns and bubble wands, while adults caught up on neighborhood gossip and sipped cold beers. This year's party held a special significance for the residents of Sycamore Lane. It was the official welcome for the Donovans, the street's newest additions. Isabella Hawthorne, as the unofficial social director of the neighborhood, had taken it upon herself to ensure that Zara and Eric felt welcomed. As the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the street, Isabella made her way to the Donovans, who were standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. "Isabella, you look lovely," Russell called out as she walked past, her sundress floating around her legs. She flashed him a smile, but her eyes were already fixed on Eric. "Eric and Zara, welcome to the neighborhood," Isabella said warmly, air-kissing Zara's cheeks and letting her hand linger perhaps a moment too long on Eric's arm. "We're so glad you could join us." The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by the fruity sangria Isabella had brought along. Zara found herself drawn into a discussion about local art galleries with some of the other neighbors, while Eric and Isabella drifted towards the Hawthorns' front yard. "You have a beautiful home," Eric commented, his eyes roving over the house. Isabella beamed with pride. "Why, thank you," she replied. "You should see the inside. We recently renovated the master bathroom. Perhaps I could give you a tour sometime. Get you some ideas for your own place?" The flirtatious undertone in Isabella's voice was unmistakable. Eric, slightly taken aback but not displeased, felt a flush creep up his neck. Before he could respond, Russell appeared, clapping a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Hope my wife isn't talking your ear off, son." Russell chuckled. Isabella shot him a look that mixed annoyance and affection. "Actually, she was just offering to show me your renovation," Eric said, his voice slightly strained. As the evening wore on, the two couples found themselves gravitating towards each other. Zara, charmed by Russell's dad jokes and genuine interest in her artwork, found herself relaxing for the first time since moving in. Isabella, meanwhile, hung on Eric's every word as he described his photography projects. By the time the party wound down, seeds had been planted. Seeds of attraction, curiosity, and temptation that would soon grow into something none of them could have anticipated. It was a week after the block party that Isabella first broached the subject with Russell. They were in bed, the TV droning in the background, when Isabella turned to her husband with a mischievous glint in her eye. Isabella broached the subject with Russell one night as they lay in bed. Her voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of excitement as she asked if he had ever considered spicing up their love life. Russell, half asleep, mumbled incoherently at first. Isabella pressed on, clarifying that she meant specifically in the bedroom. This caught Russell's attention and he became suddenly alert. Cautiously, Russell asked what exactly she had in mind. Isabella took a deep breath before suggesting they try swapping partners with another couple. The silence that followed her proposal was deafening. Russell stared at his wife, trying to determine if she was serious. As he realized she was, a mix of emotions played across his face: shock, intrigue, and a hint of arousal. Over the next few days, the Hawthorns had numerous discussions about Isabella's proposition. Russell, initially hesitant, found himself warming to the idea. The thought of being with a younger woman stirred something in him he thought had long since died. It was Isabella who finally suggested the Donovans. They're young, attractive, and new to the area, she reasoned. They might be open to something like this. Approaching the younger couple proved to be a delicate matter. It was at a neighborhood barbecue that Isabella, emboldened by several glasses of wine, pulled Zara aside. The conversation was awkward at first, with Isabella dancing around the subject, but once the proposition was laid out, Zara's reaction surprised her. Instead of outrage or disgust, there was curiosity in the younger woman's eyes. The evening of the swap arrived with a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. The Hawthorns had suggested using their home, citing their finished basement as a perfect, private setting. As Zara and Eric walked up the driveway hand in hand, Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Are we really doing this?" He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but she could see the apprehension in his eyes as well. Isabella greeted them at the door, her smile a little too bright, her laugh a little too loud. The forced casualness of the situation was palpable as they made small talk over glasses of expensive red wine. Russell busied himself with the stereo, filling the room with soft jazz in an attempt to ease the tension. After what seemed like an eternity of awkward conversation, Isabella finally stood up. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "shall we?" They had agreed beforehand on the pairings. Isabella with Eric, Russell with Zara. As they split off, Zara couldn't help but glance back at Eric, a moment of uncertainty passing between them. But then Eric disappeared down the hallway with Isabella, and Zara found herself alone with Russell. Russell led Zara to the guest bedroom, his hand gentle on the small of her back. Despite his earlier bravado, he felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. It had been years since he'd been with anyone other than Isabella. Zara, sensing his hesitation, took the initiative. She reached up and kissed him softly, then more passionately. Russell responded, his hands exploring her young, firm body with growing confidence. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Isabella was living out the fantasy she'd been harboring since she first laid eyes on Eric. His youthful energy and enthusiasm more than made up for any lack of experience. Isabella felt desired, beautiful, alive in a way she hadn't in years. Eric, for his part, was intoxicated by Isabella's confidence and sensuality. As the encounters reached their climax, a series of emotions washed over each participant. Excitement, pleasure, guilt, and an unexpected emptiness all mingled together in a confusing cocktail. Afterwards, as they all reconvened in the living room, an awkward silence fell over the group. The reality of what they had done seemed to hit them all at once. Zara couldn't meet Eric's eyes, focusing instead on smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Russell cleared his throat several times, but couldn't seem to find any words. Only Isabella seemed truly at ease, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was Eric who finally broke the silence. "Well," he said, his attempt at a casual tone falling flat. That was something. The tension broke and nervous laughter filled the room. They made stilted small talk for a few more minutes before the Donovans made their excuses and left. As Zara and Eric walked home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, they were unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their relationships. Back in the Hawthorne house, Isabella hummed to herself as she cleaned up, already thinking about the next time. Russell watched her, a nagging feeling of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. None of them realized that this night was just the beginning, the first step down a path that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. In the days following the swap, life seemed to return to normal, but beneath the surface, changes were brewing, particularly in Eric Donovan. Eric found himself unable to stop thinking about Isabella. The encounter had awakened something in him, a hunger he'd never experienced before. He began to find excuses to be outside when he knew Isabella would be leaving for work. He'd wave, trying to appear casual, but his eyes would linger on her long after she'd driven away. Zara noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. Eric seemed distracted, often lost in thought. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he was either too tired or not in the mood. Their once passionate lovemaking became infrequent and mechanical. One afternoon, Zara came home early from a client meeting to find Eric's photography workspace in disarray. As she began to tidy up, she noticed something odd. Hidden beneath a stack of prints was a folder filled with photos of Isabella. Some were clearly taken from a distance, capturing Isabella gardening, getting her mail, or walking to her car. Others were more intimate, zoomed-in shots through windows, Isabella in various states of undress. Zara felt her stomach churn. This wasn't just a harmless crush or the after effects of their encounter. This was something much more sinister. Meanwhile, Isabella had begun to notice Eric's increased presence in her daily life. At first, she was flattered by the attention, even reciprocating with flirtatious glances and accidental touches when they'd run into each other. But as the days wore on, Eric's behavior became more erratic and intense. He began sending her messages at all hours, alternating between passionate declarations of love and angry accusations when she didn't respond quickly enough. Isabella tried to let him down gently, explaining that their encounter was a one-time thing, but Eric refused to accept it. One night, Isabella woke to the sound of something hitting her bedroom window. Peering out, she saw Eric standing in her front yard, a handful of pebbles in his hand. His eyes, wild and unfocused, locked onto hers. "I can't live without you, Isabella," he called out, his voice breaking. "We're meant to be together." Isabella quickly closed the curtains, her heart racing. She woke Russell, who grumbled as he went to confront Eric. By the time Russell made it outside, Eric had disappeared into the night, leaving only a crumpled bouquet of flowers on the front step. As Isabella lay awake that night, she realized with growing horror that her exciting sexual experiment had unleashed something dark and dangerous. She had no idea how right she was, or how tragic the consequences would be. Over the next few weeks, Eric's behavior spiraled further out of control. His obsession with Isabella consumed every aspect of his life. He neglected his photography business, spending hours stalking Isabella's social media accounts and driving by her house. Zara watched helplessly as her husband transformed into someone she barely recognized. Isabella, for her part, vacillated between fear and a perverse excitement. Part of her was terrified of Eric's growing instability, but another part, a part she was ashamed to admit existed, was thrilled by his obsessive attention. It made her feel desirable, powerful in a way she hadn't in years. The situation came to a head one afternoon when Isabella returned home to find Eric sitting in her living room. "How did you get in here?" she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Eric smiled, a cold, unsettling expression that sent chills down Isabella's spine. "You gave me a key, remember? For watering the plants when you were on vacation." Isabella's mind raced. That had been months ago, before the swap, before everything had gone wrong. She should have asked for it back. Why hadn't she asked for it back? Eric stood, moving towards her with predatory grace. "We need to talk, Isabella," he said, his voice low and intense. "About us, about our future together." Isabella backed away, fumbling for her phone. "There is no us, Eric," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave." But Eric kept advancing, his eyes wild with a mixture of love and madness. "You don't mean that," he insisted. "I know you feel what I feel. We're destined to be together, Isabella. I won't let anyone come between us." As Eric reached for her, Isabella let out a scream. The sound seemed to snap Eric out of his trance. He blinked, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. Without another word, he brushed past Isabella and out the front door. Shaking, Isabella collapsed onto the couch. She knew she should call the police, but what would she say? That she'd willingly slept with her young neighbor, and now he was stalking her. The thought of the scandal, of everyone knowing what she'd done, was unbearable. Little did Isabella know, her silence would have devastating consequences. For in his twisted mind, Eric took her failure to report him as a sign of her secret love, and he was determined to eliminate any obstacles standing in their way, no matter the cost. The tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Isabella was alone in her house, Russell having left for a golf game with friends. She was in the kitchen, mindlessly flipping through a magazine when she heard the back door open. Isabella called out with a trembling voice, asking if it was Eric. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Her heart racing, Isabella grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it out in front of her like a shield. When Eric appeared in the doorway, his eyes were glazed and unfocused, and he reeked of alcohol. He slurred that he had seen Russell drive away, declaring that now they could be together as they were supposed to be. Isabella pleaded with Eric, telling him he needed help and that this wasn't right, but she couldn't finish her sentence. Eric wasn't listening. He lunged forward, trying to grab Isabella. She shrieked and swung the knife wildly, connecting with Eric's arm and drawing blood. The sight of his own blood seemed to enrage Eric further. He roared an insult at her and charged again. In the ensuing struggle, the knife clattered to the floor. Eric's hands found Isabella's throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Isabella clawed at his face, gasping for air as her vision began to darken around the edges. In desperation, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with Eric's groin. The blow caused him to double over in pain. Releasing his grip on her throat, Isabella scrambled away, her fingers closing around the handle of the fallen knife. As Eric straightened up, his face contorted with rage, Isabella acted on pure instinct. She thrust the knife forward, feeling it sink into Eric's chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Eric looked down at the knife protruding from his body, a look of surprise replacing the anger on his face. Then slowly he crumpled to the floor. Isabella stared at Eric's still form, the reality of what she'd done crashing over her. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. The quiet of the community was shattered by the wail of sirens as police cars and an ambulance converged on the Hawthorne residence. Neighbors poured out onto their front lawns, watching in shock as paramedics rushed into the house, only to emerge shortly after, shaking their heads grimly. Detective Liam Reeves, a veteran of the Portland Police Department, arrived on the scene to find a distraught Isabella Hawthorne being questioned by officers. Her hands and clothes were stained with blood, her eyes wild with shock and fear. As Reeves approached, he overheard snippets of Isabella's statement. She was saying that Eric had attacked her, that she had no choice, and expressing shock and disbelief at what she had done. Reeves took charge of the scene, ordering a thorough search of the house and surrounding area, while crime scene technicians combed through the kitchen. Photographing the bloody knife and the signs of struggle, Reeves turned his attention to the neighbors. Zara Donovan stood at the edge of the police tape, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Reeves approached her gently, introducing himself as Detective Reeves and confirming that the victim was her husband. Zara nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. When Reeves pressed her about when she had last seen Eric, Zara managed to choke out that it had been that morning. She explained that Eric had said he was going for a walk, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to process the situation. Unable to continue, she broke down sobbing. Reeves made a note in his pad before moving on to question other neighbors. As he gathered more information, a story began to emerge of a quiet neighborhood rocked by an unthinkable crime. As the body of Eric Donovan was wheeled out on a gurney, covered by a sheet, Reeves couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than a simple home invasion gone wrong. The look in Isabella Hawthorne's eyes, a mixture of relief and guilt, told him that unraveling the truth would be a complex and delicate process. In the days following Eric's death, Detective Reeves dove deep into the lives of both the Hawthornes and the Donovans. What he uncovered was a tangled web of secrets and lies that painted a very different picture from the initial reports of a random break-in. Interviews with neighbors revealed whispers of an illicit affair between Isabella and Eric. Cell phone records showed an overwhelming number of calls and messages from Eric to Isabella in the weeks leading up to the incident, many of which had gone unanswered. But it was the discovery of Eric's photography studio that blew the case wide open. Hidden among his professional equipment, detectives found a camera with a high-powered zoom lens and memory cards filled with hundreds of photos of Isabella, many taken without her knowledge. When confronted with this evidence, Zara broke down. Through tears, she revealed the truth about the partner swap and the subsequent obsession that had gripped her husband. She spoke of Eric's erratic behavior, his neglect of their marriage, and her own fears about his mental state. Isabella, faced with the mounting evidence, finally confessed to the full story. She admitted to the affair and the stalking, but maintained that the final confrontation had been self-defense. Russell, devastated by his wife's infidelity, nonetheless stood by her side throughout the ordeal. As Reeves pieced together the events that led to that fatal Sunday afternoon, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. What had begun as a misguided attempt to spice up a stagnant marriage had spiraled into an obsession that cost a young man his life and forever changed the lives of all involved. The case, once thought to be a straightforward home invasion, was now revealed to be a complex tale of desire, betrayal, and deadly obsession. The prosecution painted Isabella as a bored housewife who initiated an affair with a younger man, then killed him to keep her indiscretion secret. They emphasized the premeditated nature of her actions, pointing to the convenient absence of her husband on the day of the killing. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Simone Jeffries, argued passionately that Isabella was a victim of stalking and harassment who acted in self-defense. They presented evidence of Eric's obsessive behavior and called expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of stalking on victims. Zara's testimony proved to be a turning point in the trial. Her emotional account of Eric's descent into obsession and her own fear for Isabella's safety swayed many jurors. "She's not the monster they're making her out to be," Zara said through tears. "Eric, he wasn't himself at the end. What happened is a tragedy, but Isabella was as much a victim as anyone." In his closing arguments, the prosecutor urged the jury not to be swayed by emotion. "The facts are clear," he insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne made a series of choices that led to this tragic outcome. She must be held accountable." Simone Jeffries, in her rebuttal, appealed to the jury's sense of empathy. "Put yourself in Isabella's shoes," she implored. Terrified, alone, confronted by a man who had been stalking her for weeks, she did what anyone would do. She fought for her life. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The fate of Isabella Hawthorne and the final judgment on this suburban tragedy now rested in their hands. Isabella Hawthorne was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. As Isabella was led away from the courtroom, the impact of the tragedy on all involved was palpable. Russell Hawthorne, his face haggard from the stress of the trial, watched his wife disappear through the courtroom doors. Despite the revelations of her infidelity, he had stood by her throughout the ordeal. Now he faced the prospect of years alone, grappling with the consequences of their ill-fated experiment. Sarah Donovan, widowed and alone, retreated from public life. The trauma of losing Eric and the public exposure of their private lives left deep scars. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of haunting paintings that would later be hailed as a powerful exploration of grief and betrayal. The residents struggled to come to terms with the events that had shattered their peaceful community. The Hawthorne and Donovan houses stood empty, constant reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Some neighbors moved away, unable to bear the memories. Those who stayed found their trust in one another irrevocably altered. The Hargroves and the Velasquez families, to all outward appearances, were living the American dream. Their manicured lawns and hybrid cars in the driveways gave no hint of the tempest brewing behind closed doors. Liam and Rachel Hargrove had been college sweethearts, married for 15 years. Liam, a software engineer for a local tech startup, was known for his dry wit and passion for homebrewing. Rachel, a pediatric nurse, volunteered at the neighborhood watch and was always ready with a plate of her famous lavender shortbread for new neighbors. They were the couple others looked to as a model of stability and success. Just 2 doors down lived Rafael and Marisol Velasquez. Rafael, a charismatic restaurateur, had moved from Mexico City a decade ago to open what would become the hottest fusion taqueria. His wife Marisol, a yoga instructor and part-time translator, was beloved for her vibrant energy and warm hugs. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in a beachside wedding in Tulum just 5 years prior. The two couples had become fast friends shortly after the Velasquez moved in, bonding over weekend barbecues and a shared love for wineries. They vacationed together and celebrated holidays as a unit. To their friends and neighbors, they were the picture of modern, multicultural friendship. But beneath the surface of potlucks and game nights, a current of restlessness was growing, a longing for excitement, for newness, for the spark that had faded in the routines of married life. It was this unspoken desire that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. The idea first surfaced on a crisp autumn evening, as the 4 friends lounged in the Hargroves' hot tub, steam rising into the star-studded sky. The wine had been flowing freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. Raphael, always the jokester, had made a quip about wife-swapping that hung in the air a beat too long before nervous laughter dispersed it. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the joke resurfaced, each time met with less laughter and more contemplative silence. It was Rachel who finally broached the subject seriously. During one of the couple's regular dinner dates, "We're all adults here," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands beneath the table. "So maybe there's something to this idea, a way to spice things up." The silence that followed was deafening. Marisol's eyes widened, darting between her husband and friends. Liam stared intently at his plate. It was Raphael who broke the tension, his usual grin replaced by a look of thoughtful consideration. The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night. Boundaries were discussed, scenarios explored, concerns voiced. Liam, initially the most hesitant, found himself warming to the idea as the others talked through the logistics. Marisol, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic once the initial shock wore off. "It's just physical, right?" she said, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "No feelings involved, a temporary arrangement to explore and then return to our partners." They agreed to think it over individually, and as couples before making any decisions. The next week was filled with hushed conversations behind closed doors, furtive glances across the street, and more than one sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, imagining possibilities. When they reconvened, the decision was unanimous if tentative. They would try it, just once, to see how it felt. Rules were established: a 1-month time frame, complete honesty with their original partners, and the freedom to call it off at any time if anyone felt uncomfortable. As they raised their glasses to seal the agreement, None of them could have foreseen the tragedy that would unfold from this moment of adventurous curiosity. The die was cast, and the wheel of fate had begun to turn. The agreed-upon evening arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The Hargroves' home, usually a warm and inviting space, felt charged with an electric anticipation. Liam had spent the afternoon obsessively cleaning, a nervous habit that manifested whenever he felt out of his depth. Rachel, meanwhile, had changed outfits no less than 5 times before settling on a simple black dress that hugged her curves. Across the street, Raphael and Marisol prepared with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Raphael, ever the showman, had set out candles and opened a bottle of expensive tequila he'd been saving for a special occasion. Marisol moved through her son's salutations, trying to center herself and calm the butterflies in her stomach. At precisely 8 p.m., as agreed, Rachel made the short walk to the Velasquez home. Her heart pounded with each step, a mixture of guilt and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Raphael greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a glass of tequila, which she accepted gratefully. Meanwhile, Marisol arrived at the Hargroves, a vision in a flowing red dress that seemed to accentuate her every movement. Liam, usually so composed, found himself fumbling with the wine opener, suddenly acutely aware of Marisol's presence in a way he'd never been before. The initial moments were awkward, filled with stilted small talk and nervous laughter. But as the alcohol flowed and the reality of their situation set in, the atmosphere began to shift. Raphael, ever the charmer, regaled Rachel with stories of his childhood, each tale bringing him physically closer to her on the couch. Rachel found herself captivated, not just by the stories, but by the passion with which he told them, so different from Liam's reserved nature. Across the street, Liam and Marisol had moved from the living room to the kitchen, where Marisol insisted on teaching Liam how to properly make guacamole. The simple act of chopping avocados became an intimate dance, their hands brushing against each other. As the night progressed, inhibitions lowered and desires rose to the surface. Raphael's hand found its way to Rachel's thigh, and she surprised herself by not pulling away. In the Hargrove kitchen, Liam found himself mesmerized by the graceful curves of Marisol. The transition from social interaction to physical intimacy was both abrupt and natural. A lingering look, a tentative touch, and suddenly they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Clothes were shed, breaths quickened, and in the dim light of bedrooms usually shared with other partners, new connections were forged. In the aftermath, as they lay in unfamiliar beds beside familiar friends, each participant grappled with a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, excitement, confusion, and a strange sense of loss all mingled together. As they drifted off to sleep, none of them realized that this night had set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. For in the dim light of the Hargrove bedroom, Liam had looked into Marisol's eyes and felt something stir within him that went far beyond the physical boundaries they had agreed upon. In the days following the swap, life in the Laurelhurst neighborhood seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Liam went back to his coding, Rachel to her patients, Raphael to his restaurant, and Marisol to her yoga studio. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a subtle shift had occurred, particularly within Liam Hargrove. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. Liam found himself lingering a little longer at the window, his gaze drifting towards the Velasquez home. He began taking more frequent walks, timing them to coincide with Marisol's return from her yoga classes. His usual playlist of tech podcasts was replaced by the Latin music Raphael had introduced him to, the rhythms reminding him of Marisol. As weeks passed, these small changes became more pronounced. Liam's colleagues at the startup noticed his distraction, his usual laser focus on code, replaced by long periods of staring blankly at his screen. He began learning Spanish using a language app, telling Rachel it was for an upcoming project at work. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, lingering on group pictures where Marisol's smile seemed to outshine everything else. Liam tried to rationalize these feelings, to suppress the growing emotional attachment he felt towards Marisol. He reminded himself of the agreement, of the boundaries they had set. This was supposed to be a one-time thing, a purely physical exploration. But in quiet moments, he couldn't deny the warmth that spread through his chest when he thought of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The internal struggle began to manifest externally. Liam became irritable, snapping at Rachel over small issues. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the temptation of seeking out Marisol's company. When the two couples did get together, Liam's behavior oscillated between overly attentive to Marisol and completely avoiding her, drawing curious glances from both Rachel and Raphael. One evening, as Liam lay awake beside a sleeping Rachel, the full weight of his emotions crashed over him. He realized, with a mix of exhilaration and horror, that he was falling in love with Marisol. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He knew he should end it, should confess to Rachel and distance himself from Marisol, but the mere idea of never being close to her again felt like a physical pain in his chest. As dawn broke, Liam made a decision. He would try harder to suppress these feelings, to be the husband Rachel deserved. But even as he resolved this, a small part of him whispered that it was already too late. The seed of desire had been planted, and it was growing into something that couldn't be easily uprooted. As autumn gave way to winter, the once warm and easy friendship between the two couples began to cool. The change was subtle at first, manifesting in canceled plans and shorter, less frequent interactions. But as weeks passed, the tension became palpable, a silent presence at every gathering. Rachel was the first to notice the shift in her husband's behavior. Liam, once an open book to her, had become distant and guarded. She caught him checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain notifications before quickly schooling his features back to neutrality. When she asked about his day, his answers became vague and evasive. During one of their now rare dinners with the Velasquez, Rachel couldn't help but notice the way Liam's eyes followed Marisol's every movement. Raphael, usually jovial and laid back, began to exhibit signs of stress. His legendary patience in the kitchen shortened, and staff at his restaurant whispered about his uncharacteristic outbursts. At home, he became possessive of Marisol in a way he'd never been before, questioning her about her daily activities and suggesting they spend less time with the Hargroves. Marisol, caught in the middle, found herself torn between her growing affection for Liam and her commitment to Raphael. She tried to maintain normalcy, suggesting double dates and neighborhood gatherings like before, but each interaction was fraught with unspoken tensions and loaded glances. The breaking point came at a neighborhood block party in early December. As holiday lights twinkled on every house, the four found themselves together for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long silences and forced laughter. When Marisol excused herself to get a drink, Liam immediately offered to help, leaving Rachel and Raphael alone. Rachel, her suspicions finally boiling over, confronted Raphael. "Is there something going on between them?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. Raphael, his own jealousy and fears rising to the surface, lashed out defensively. "Maybe you should ask your husband that," he snapped back. Their heated exchange drew the attention of other partygoers, and by the time Liam and Marisol returned, they found their spouses in a tense standoff. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward apologies and hasty goodbyes. That night in both households, long-avoided conversations finally took place. Accusations were made, denials issued, and tears shed. Rachel demanded answers from Liam, her voice cracking as she asked if he was in love with Marisol. Liam's hesitation before his denial was all the confirmation she needed. Across the street, Raphael's jealousy exploded into a rage that left Marisol shaken. His accusations of betrayal and demands for the truth echoed through their home, a jarring contrast to the peaceful life they'd built. As the night wore on, all four individuals grappled with the realization that their simple agreement had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially destructive. The foundation of trust that had supported their friendships and marriages was crumbling, and in its place, a volatile mix of love, jealousy, and resentment was taking root. January 15th dawned cold and gray, a thick fog hanging over the town like a portent of the tragedy to come. The weeks following the block party confrontation had been tense, with both couples retreating into themselves, communication reduced to terse texts and avoided glances across the street. That evening, Liam sat in his home office, ostensibly working late, but in reality lost in thoughts of Marisol. The sound of the front door opening and closing jolted him from his reverie. Rachel's voice, tight with barely controlled emotion, called out his name. In the living room, Liam found not just Rachel, but Raphael and Marisol as well. The atmosphere was charged, Raphael's face a mask of barely contained fury, Marisol's eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Rachel stood apart, her posture rigid, arms crossed defensively across her chest.
"We need to talk," Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "All of us. This has gone on long enough." What followed was a maelstrom of emotions, years of friendship, and months of hidden feelings exploding into the open. Raphael accused Liam of pursuing Marisol, of trying to steal her away. Rachel, tears streaming down her face, demanded to know how long the affair had been going on. Marisol, caught between her growing feelings for Liam and her loyalty to Raphael, tried desperately to calm the situation. Liam, overwhelmed by the onslaught, initially retreated into denial. But as the accusations flew and emotions heightened, something inside him snapped. In a moment of reckless honesty, he confessed his feelings for Marisol, his words cutting through the chaos like a knife. Raphael, his face contorting with rage, lunged at Liam. The two men grappled, years of friendship evaporating in an instant as fists flew and furniture toppled. Rachel screamed for them to stop, her pleas drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Marisol tried to intervene, attempting to pull Raphael away, but was shoved aside in the chaos. In the frenzy, no one noticed Raphael's hand closing around a heavy crystal vase. It wasn't until the sickening thud of crystal meeting flesh and bone echoed through the room that everything froze. Liam crumpled to the ground, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The vase slipped from Raphael's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, no one moved, the scene before them too horrific to comprehend. It was Rachel who broke the paralysis, her nurse's training kicking in as she rushed to Liam's side. Her fingers frantically sought a pulse as she barked orders at the others to call 911. Marisol, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with her phone, her tear-blurred vision making it hard to dial. Raphael stood motionless, his face a mask of shock and disbelief at what he had done. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through the haze, snapping him back to the horrifying reality of the situation. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but their efforts were in vain. Liam Hargrove was pronounced dead at the scene, his life extinguished in a moment of uncontrolled passion. As police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street, neighbors emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion. In the chaos that followed, statements were taken, evidence collected. Raphael, still in a state of shock, offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car. As dawn broke, the idyllic facade of Laurelhurst had been shattered. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, a stark contrast to the well-manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned some homes. The investigation into Liam Hargrove's death began in earnest the following morning. Detective Amelia Schaefer, a veteran of Homicide Division, took charge of the case, unaware of the shocking plot twist that was about to be revealed. Her first step was to separate the three survivors, each sequestered in a different interview room at the precinct. Rachel Hargrove, still in shock, provided a disjointed account of the evening's events. She spoke of the growing tension between the couples, the suspicions that had eaten away at her for weeks. Her description of the fatal confrontation was punctuated by bouts of sobbing and long haunted silences. Marisol Velasquez, visibly distraught, initially refused to speak without a lawyer present. When one arrived, she gave a tearful confession about the affair with Liam, insisting that it had been emotional rather than physical since the initial swap. She described Raphael's increasing jealousy and controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Raphael Velasquez, advised by his lawyer to remain silent, sat stoically through initial questioning. However, as the hours wore on and the gravity of his situation became clear, he broke down. In a moment of raw honesty, he admitted to striking Liam but insisted he never meant to kill him. It was an accident, he repeated over and over, his voice hoarse with emotion. As statements were taken, forensic teams combed through both the Hargrove and Velasquez residences. They uncovered a series of text messages between Liam and Marisol, revealing the depth of their emotional entanglement. Emails drafts found on Liam's computer showed he had been contemplating leaving Rachel, adding another layer to the tragedy. The murder weapon, the crystal vase, was sent to the lab for analysis. Fingerprints matched Raphael's, and traces of Liam's blood and hair were found embedded in the shattered pieces. The force required to cause such catastrophic injury was consistent with Raphael's build and the rage described by witnesses. Neighbors were interviewed, painting a picture of two couples who had once been the cornerstone of the community. Many expressed shock, unable to reconcile the violent act with the friendly, successful people they thought they knew. As the investigation progressed,
Detective Schaefer began to piece together a timeline of events. The initial wife swap, intended as a one-time exploration, had sparked an emotional affair between Liam and Marisol. This, in turn, had led to mounting tensions and suspicions, culminating in the fatal confrontation. The case, initially seeming straightforward, grew more complex as layers of motivation and circumstance were revealed. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, Detective Schaefer stood before a board covered in photos, timelines, and connecting threads. The facts were clear, but the full truth of what had transpired in the Hargrove living room that fateful night remained elusive. The case was far from closed, and the ripples of this tragedy would continue to spread through the lives of all involved. As the investigation deepened, Detective Schaefer and her team began to uncover layers of complexity that went beyond the surface narrative. Delving into the backgrounds of all four individuals involved revealed hidden motivations and long-buried secrets that cast the events in a new light. Liam Hargrove, it emerged, had a history of depression that he had carefully hidden from all but Rachel. Interviews with his colleagues revealed a man who had been struggling with his work in recent months, his usual passion for coding replaced by a listlessness that many had attributed to simple burnout. A deeper dive into his medical records showed a recent change in antidepressant medication, one that came with warnings about increased impulsivity and mood swings. Rachel's perfected image of the devoted wife and nurse also began to crack under scrutiny. Former co-workers spoke of her intense ambition, of opportunities for advancement she had passed up to support Liam's career. Some hinted at resentment that had been building for years, carefully hidden behind a facade of contentment. Her enthusiastic suggestion of the wife swap began to look less like a spontaneous idea and more like a calculated risk to shake up her stagnant marriage. Rafael Velasquez's charismatic exterior concealed a man haunted by insecurities. Immigration records revealed a complicated history, with Rafael having overstayed a student visa years ago before marrying Marisol and gaining legal status. This precarious past had left him with a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had built, manifesting in his recent controlling behavior towards Marisol. Perhaps most surprisingly, Marisol's image as the carefree yoga instructor belied a woman with hidden depths. A sealed juvenile record from her teenage years in California hinted at a troubled past she had worked hard to overcome. Friends from before her marriage to Rafael described a passionate, often reckless young woman who had seemingly transformed herself into the picture of stability upon moving to Portland. As these details came to light, the narrative of the case shifted. What had initially seemed a straightforward crime of passion revealed itself to be the culmination of years of unspoken tensions, secret struggles, and unfulfilled desires. The wife swap agreement, far from being the catalyst, now appeared to be merely the spark that had ignited a powder keg of suppressed emotions and hidden resentments. Detective Schaefer found herself grappling with a case that defied easy categorization. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, with each person involved bearing some measure of responsibility for the tragedy that had unfolded. The trial of Rafael Velasquez for the murder of Liam Hargrove began on a rainy Monday in late spring, nearly 6 months after the fatal confrontation. Rafael, looking gaunt and somber in a dark suit, was led in by his defense team. Rachel Hargrove, still wearing her grief like a shroud, entered flanked by supportive colleagues. Marisol, who would be testifying for both the prosecution and the defense, slipped in through a side entrance, her once vibrant presence dimmed by months of guilt and public scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, District Attorney laid out the prosecution's case. She painted a picture of Rafael as a man consumed by jealousy, who had lashed out in a premeditated act of violence. The crystal vase, she argued, had been grabbed with intent, the fatal blow delivered with the full force of Rafael's rage. In contrast, Rafael's defense team presented their client as a man pushed to the breaking point. They spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of the betrayal Rafael had suffered, and of the confrontation as a moment of temporary insanity rather than calculated murder. Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts debated the force and angle of the fatal blow. Neighbors recounted the gradual shift in dynamics between the two couples. Colleagues and friends of both Liam and Rafael testified to their states of mind in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. As the trial neared its end, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. The judge,
taking into account Raphael's unique circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others believing it appropriately balanced justice with mercy. Saffron Callahan was a force to be reckoned with. From a young age, she exhibited a fierce determination and an insatiable curiosity that set her apart from her peers. Born to Liam and Fiona Callahan, Saffron's early years were marked by instability. Her father's struggle with alcoholism and her mother's subsequent depression created a tumultuous home environment. Despite these challenges, or perhaps because of them, Saffron developed a resilience and drive that would shape her future. At school, Saffron excelled academically and socially. She was editor of the school newspaper, captain of the debate team, and a straight-A student. Her teachers often remarked on her ability to see through facades and uncover hidden truths, a skill that would later draw her to journalism. When her parents divorced during her sophomore year of college, Saffron found herself at a crossroads. Unwilling to choose between her parents and needing a stable environment to continue her studies, she accepted her Uncle Everett and Aunt Constance's offer to live with them. Moving into the Callahan family home was a turning point for Saffron. For the first time, she experienced the stability and support she had always craved. Everett, in particular, took an interest in nurturing her talents, often engaging her in discussions about politics, business, and current events. Everett Callahan was the epitome of the American dream. At 45, he had built a real estate empire from the ground up, transforming it into one of the most successful firms in the Northeast. His magnetic personality and sharp business acumen had earned him both admirers and enemies in equal measure. Standing tall with salt and pepper hair, Everett cut an imposing figure. He had a way of commanding any room he entered, his charm and wit drawing people in like moths to a flame. Everett's childhood had been markedly different from his current life of luxury. Growing up in a working-class family, he had learned the value of hard work and ambition from an early age. His father, a construction worker, and his mother, a waitress, had instilled in him a drive to succeed that bordered on obsession. After putting himself through college and business school, Everett had thrown himself into the world of real estate. His ability to spot potential where others saw only dilapidation had quickly set him apart from his peers. Within a decade, he had transformed the company from a small local firm into a regional powerhouse. To the outside world, Everett appeared to have it all: a beautiful wife, 2 children, a successful business, and a reputation as a pillar of the community. He served on the boards of several charities and was a generous donor to local causes. However, beneath this perfect exterior lurked a restlessness that Everett struggled to quell. Despite his outward success, Everett battled with a persistent feeling of emptiness. The thrill of closing deals and amassing wealth had begun to wane, leaving him searching for new sources of excitement. Everett's relationship with his niece Saffron added another layer of complexity to his life. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who shared his drive and ambition. As she grew older, he found himself drawn to her in ways that both excited and disturbed him. The line between avuncular affection and something more sinister began to blur, setting the stage for the tragedy that was to come. It was a crisp autumn evening when Saffron's world turned upside down. She had been working late at the local newspaper, where she had secured an internship, when she realized she had left her laptop charger at home. Knowing her aunt and uncle were supposed to be at a charity gala that evening, she decided to swing by the house to retrieve it. As Saffron pulled into the driveway, she noticed her uncle's car parked in its usual spot. Thinking he must have decided to skip the gala, she entered the house quietly, not wanting to disturb him if he was working in his study. The house was eerily quiet as Saffron made her way upstairs. As she approached her room, she heard sounds coming from her uncle's bedroom. Concern and curiosity warred within her as she inched closer to the partially open door. What Saffron saw through the crack in the door would haunt her for the rest of her short life. There was her Uncle Everett, locked in a passionate embrace with a woman who was decidedly not her Aunt Constance. Saffron's mind reeled as she tried to process what she was witnessing. The uncle she had idolized, the man she had seen as a paragon of virtue and success, was nothing but a common cheater. Backing away from the door, Saffron's foot caught on a loose floorboard, causing a loud creak. Her heart stopped as she heard the sudden silence from the bedroom. Without thinking, she dashed down the stairs and out of the house, barely remembering to close the front door behind her. Once in her car, Saffron sat trembling, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Shock, anger, and a strange sense of betrayal fought for dominance. She had always thought of her uncle as invincible, above the petty weaknesses of ordinary men. To see him engaged in such a tawdry affair shattered the pedestal she had placed him on. In the days that followed, Saffron found herself obsessively analyzing every interaction she had ever had with her uncle. She began to see hidden meanings in casual touches, to reinterpret compliments and gestures of affection through a new, unsettling lens. The knowledge of Everett's affair became a poisonous secret, eating away at Saffron from the inside. She found herself unable to meet her uncle's eyes at the dinner table, flinching away from his usual affectionate pat on the shoulder. Her aunt noticed the change in Saffron's behavior, but attributed it to stress from her internship and upcoming job search. Little did anyone know that this discovery would set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Veronica Ashworth was not the type of woman one would typically imagine as the other woman in an extramarital affair. At 38, she was a respected art curator at the Museum of Art in Hartford. Her professional demeanor and sophisticated taste made her a favorite among the city's elite, who often sought her advice on building their private collections. With her sharp features and penchant for minimalist designer clothing, Veronica cut a striking figure. She was intelligent, cultured, and fiercely independent, qualities that had initially drawn Everett to her. Their paths had first crossed at a museum fundraiser 2 years prior. Everett had been immediately captivated by Veronica's wit and her refreshingly direct manner. For her part, Veronica had found in Everett a man who could keep up with her intellectually, something she had found lacking in many of her previous relationships. What had begun as a meeting of minds soon evolved into a physical relationship. They would meet in upscale hotels during business trips or steal moments together when Everett claimed to be working late. Veronica, who had sworn off serious relationships after a painful divorce in her early 30s, found herself falling for the charismatic real estate mogul. However, Veronica was not naive. She knew Everett was married and had no illusions about their relationship. She told herself that she was satisfied with the stolen moments and passionate encounters, that she didn't need or want the complications of a full-time relationship. Yet, as the affair continued, Veronica found herself increasingly dissatisfied with the secrecy and limitations of their arrangement. She began to hope, against her better judgment, that Everett might leave his wife for her. Little did Veronica know that her affair with Everett was about to be thrust into the spotlight in the most tragic way possible. The discovery of their relationship would set off a chain reaction that would end in murder, forever altering the lives of everyone involved. In the weeks following her discovery of Everett's affair, Saffron found herself spiraling into a dark obsession. Her once bright future seemed to dim as she became consumed with thoughts of her uncle and the mysterious other woman. Saffron's work at the newspaper began to suffer as she spent countless hours scouring social media and local event photos, trying to identify the woman she had glimpsed in Everett's bedroom. Her search became all-consuming, causing her to neglect her responsibilities and withdraw from her friends and family. As she delved deeper into her investigation, Saffron began to experience a disturbing shift in her emotions. The initial shock and disgust at her uncle's infidelity gradually gave way to a complex mix of jealousy and desire. She found herself imagining what it would be like to be the object of Everett's illicit affections, to be the one he risked everything for. These thoughts both thrilled and horrified Saffron. She knew they were wrong, that the very idea of being attracted to her uncle was taboo. Yet she couldn't shake the growing fixation. She began to pay more attention to her appearance when she knew Everett would be around, wearing more makeup and choosing outfits that accentuated her figure. Saffron's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Her Aunt Constance expressed concern over her niece's sudden mood swings and distracted demeanor. Everett, too, seemed to sense the change in Saffron, often catching her staring at him with an unreadable expression. One evening, as Saffron was helping Constance prepare dinner, she overheard a phone conversation between Everett and someone he called V. The intimate tone of his voice left no doubt in Saffron's mind that this was the other woman. Hearing the affection in her uncle's voice as he spoke to his lover ignited a fierce jealousy in Saffron that she could barely contain. That night, alone in her room, Saffron made a decision. She would expose Everett's affair, but not out of any sense of moral duty or concern for her aunt. Though Saffron's motivations were far more selfish and twisted, she convinced herself that by revealing the affair, she would be removing the other woman from the equation, leaving her free to pursue her own relationship with Everett. In her increasingly delusional state, Saffron began to reinterpret every interaction she'd ever had with her uncle. The proud smile he'd given her at her high school graduation, the long conversations they'd had about her future, the comforting hug he'd offered when she was upset. All of these took on new, inappropriate meanings in Saffron's mind. As she formulated her plan to confront Everett, Saffron's guilt and shame were overwhelmed by a toxic mix of desire and a misguided sense of entitlement. She had convinced herself that she understood Everett in a way no one else did, that they shared a special connection that transcended their familial relationship. Little did Saffron know that her descent into obsession was leading her down a path from which there would be no return. The once promising young journalist was now on a collision course with tragedy, driven by desires she barely understood, and a jealousy that would ultimately prove fatal. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Saffron decided it was time to put her plan into action. Saffron found Everett in his study, poring over some blueprints for a new development. She knocked on the open door, her heart pounding so loudly Everett looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile that made Saffron's knees weak. "Everett, is it all right if I talk to you about something?" Saffron's voice quavered slightly as she spoke. Noticing her serious tone, Everett's expression shifted to one of concern. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Saffron closed the door behind her and took a deep breath. "I know about your affair, Uncle Everett." The color drained from Everett's face as he stared at his niece in shock. "I saw you that night you were supposed to be at the gala. I came home and saw you with her." She paused, gathering her courage for what she was about to say next. "And I want you to know that it's okay. I understand." Everett's shock turned to confusion. "This isn't something you should be involved in. It's complicated, and it's not what you think." Taking a step closer to her uncle, Saffron's voice dropped to a near whisper. "I think it's exactly what I think. You're not happy with Aunt Constance. You need someone who truly understands you, someone who can match your passion and ambition." With each word, she moved closer until she was standing directly in front of Everett's desk. Everett stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Saffron, this conversation needs to end right now. You're my niece, and what you're implying is completely inappropriate." But Saffron was too far gone in her delusion to heed the warning in Everett's voice. In a move that would forever alter the course of both their lives, she circled the desk and pressed herself against him. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Everett looked down at his niece, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Shock, anger, and something darker that Saffron mistook for desire. Then, with a forceful push, he shoved her away from him. "What do you think you're doing? Have you lost your mind?" The rejection hit Saffron like a physical blow. She stumbled backwards, her face flushing with humiliation and anger. Neither of them could have known in that moment how this confrontation would set in motion a series of events that would end in tragedy. The lines had been crossed and there was no going back. In the days following the confrontation, an uneasy tension settled over the Callahan household. Saffron avoided Everett as much as possible, shame and anger warring within her. Everett, for his part, seemed determined to pretend nothing had happened, maintaining a facade of normalcy that only heightened Saffron's distress. It was on a Friday evening, nearly 2 weeks after the incident in the study, that everything changed. Constance had taken the children to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving Everett and Saffron alone in the house. Saffron had been planning to spend the evening out with friends, a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating atmosphere at home. As she was heading out the door, Everett called out to her, "Saffron, can we talk for a moment?" Everett gestured for her to join him in the living room. "I think we need to clear the air about what happened." Saffron sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her body tense. "I'd rather not talk about it. Can we just forget it ever happened?" Everett sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't think we can." Something in his tone made Saffron look up, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks. What she saw there made her breath catch in her throat. Gone was the anger and disgust she had expected. Instead, she saw a mixture of guilt,
desire, and resignation that mirrored her own conflicted emotions. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted irrevocably. Everett moved closer, his voice low and intense. "This is wrong, Saffron. We both know it's wrong. But I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." What followed was a passionate, frenzied encounter that left them both breathless and filled with equal parts exhilaration and shame. As they lay tangled together on the sofa, the full weight of what they had done began to settle over them. In the weeks that followed, Everett and Saffron engaged in a dangerous dance of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. They both knew what they were doing was wrong, that it could destroy their family if anyone ever found out. But the thrill of their forbidden relationship, combined with the genuine affection and understanding they shared, proved too addictive to give up. Little did they know that their illicit affair was building towards a catastrophic conclusion. The web of lies and betrayal they were weaving would soon unravel with deadly consequences. As Everett and Saffron's secret relationship intensified, the atmosphere in the Callahan home grew increasingly strained. Constance, though unaware of the true nature of the situation, sensed that something was amiss. She noticed the furtive glances between her husband and niece, the way they seemed to tense up when in the same room together. The situation came to a head one Saturday afternoon when Constance walked in on Everett and Saffron in what appeared to be an intense, whispered argument. They sprang apart as soon as they noticed her, but Constance had seen enough to arouse her suspicions. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice laced with concern and a hint of accusation. Saffron mumbled something about a disagreement over a business proposal before hurrying from the room. Everett attempted to smooth things over, claiming he had been giving Saffron advice about her career prospects, but Constance remained unconvinced. From that moment on, Constance began to pay closer attention to her husband and niece's interactions. She noticed how they always seemed to be in the same room, how their conversations would abruptly cease when she entered. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to grow. As the weeks passed, the tension in the house became palpable. Family dinners, once a time of lively conversation and laughter, became stilted affairs filled with awkward silences and forced small talk. Constance's attempts to draw out what was wrong were met with deflection from Everett and evasion from Saffron. Unbeknownst to all, the carefully constructed facade of the Callahan family was beginning to crack. The truth, with all its ugly implications, was threatening to burst forth, and when it did, the consequences would be devastating. As autumn gave way to winter, Everett Callahan found himself trapped in a prison of his own making. The initial thrill of his affair with Saffron had long since faded, replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. The pressure was coming from all sides. Veronica, unaware of his dalliance with Saffron, had begun to push for more commitment. She wanted him to leave Constance, to start a new life with her. Her patience was wearing thin, and her threats to expose their affair were becoming more frequent and more serious. At home, Constance's suspicions had not abated. Her once trusting nature had been replaced by a quiet watchfulness that set Everett's nerves on edge. He caught her checking his phone when she thought he wasn't looking, noticed her questioning glances when he came home late from work. But it was Saffron who posed the greatest threat. What had begun as a misguided infatuation on her part had evolved into something far more dangerous. She had become possessive, jealous not just of Constance but of Veronica as well. Her demands for Everett's time and attention were becoming increasingly difficult to manage. One particularly tense evening, after a close call where Constance had nearly walked in on them in a compromising position, Everett tried to end things with Saffron. "This has to stop," he had told her. Saffron's eyes had flashed with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You can't end this, I won't let you. If you try to leave me, I'll tell everyone what we've done." The threat hung in the air between them, and Everett felt the last vestiges of control slipping away from him. He was trapped, caught between three women, each holding a piece of his destruction in their hands. The night that would change everything started like any other. The Callahan family had just finished dinner, with Constance and the children settling in for a movie night. Everett begged off, claiming he had work to finish in his study. Saffron too excused herself, saying she had plans with friends. But Saffron had no intention of going out that night. Instead, she waited until she was sure the rest of the family was engrossed in their movie before slipping into Everett's study. She found him at his desk, his head in his hands. "We need to talk," Saffron said, closing the door behind her. Saffron moved closer, her eyes blazing with a mixture of hurt and determination.
You need to choose her or me. I won't be your little secret anymore." In that moment, looking at Saffron's face twisted with jealousy and desperation, Everett saw his entire life crumbling before his eyes. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was about to be torn apart by this girl's misguided obsession. Something inside Everett broke. With a roar of frustration and fear, he lunged at Saffron, his hands closing around her throat. He wanted to stop her, to silence the threats that were destroying his world. But once he started, he couldn't stop. Saffron's eyes widened in shock and fear as she clawed at his hands, trying to break free. But Everett was stronger, his grip fueled by panic and adrenaline. It was over in minutes. Saffron's struggles weakened, then ceased altogether. When Everett finally came to his senses and released his grip, she crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The discovery of Saffron's body sent shockwaves through the Callahan household and the wider community. It was Constance who found her, alerted by the unusual silence from Everett's study. Her scream of horror brought the children running, and within minutes the house was swarming with police and paramedics. Everett, in a state of shock, had been found sitting in his chair, staring blankly at Saffron's body. He offered no resistance as the police led him away, his silence interpreted as stunned grief by the officers on the scene. Detective Lena Kirka, a veteran of the police department's homicide division, was assigned to lead the investigation. From the moment she stepped into the Callahan home, she sensed that this case was far more complex than a simple home invasion gone wrong, which was the initial theory. As she interviewed the family members, inconsistencies began to emerge. Constance, while devastated, seemed to be harboring suspicions about her husband. The children, Rowan and Ivy, spoke of increasing tension in the house over the past few months, particularly between Everett and Saffron. But it was Everett's behavior that raised the most red flags for Detective Kirk. His affect was flat, his responses to questions vague and evasive. He claimed to have been working in his study all evening, not hearing anything until Constance's scream. Yet, the detective noted there were signs of a struggle in the room, and Everett's clothing was disheveled. As the investigation progressed, more questions arose. Why had Saffron lied about going out with friends? What was she doing in Everett's study so late at night? And most intriguingly, who was the mysterious V that appeared frequently in Saffron's text messages and emails? The autopsy report brought another twist to the case. The cause of death was strangulation, but the medical examiner also found evidence of sexual activity shortly before Saffron's death. This revelation cast the case in a new, disturbing light. As Detective Kirk dug deeper, she began to uncover a web of secrets and lies that ran through the heart of the Callahan family. The picture-perfect facade was crumbling, revealing dark truths that would shock the community to its core. As the investigation into Saffron's murder intensified, Detective Kirk and her team began to piece together the complex puzzle of relationships and secrets within the Callahan family. Each new revelation brought them closer to the shocking truth. A breakthrough came when forensics recovered deleted text messages from Saffron's phone. The messages revealed a passionate, illicit relationship with an older man, referred to only as E. The content of the messages left little doubt that E was Everett Callahan. Armed with this information, Detective Kirk brought Everett in for another round of questioning. Faced with the evidence, Everett's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. He admitted to the affair with Saffron, but vehemently denied killing her, claiming that their relationship had been consensual and that he loved his niece. However, Everett's story was further complicated when Veronica Ashworth came forward. Initially reluctant to involve herself in the investigation, Veronica finally revealed her long-standing affair with Everett after being confronted with evidence linking her to him. Her testimony painted a picture of a man torn between multiple relationships, struggling to keep his various secrets from colliding. Meanwhile, a more thorough search of the Callahan home uncovered a journal hidden in Saffron's room. The entries detailed her growing obsession with her uncle, her discovery of his affair with Veronica, and her plan to confront him on the night of her death. The final entry, dated the day she died, contained a chilling line. "Tonight everything changes. He'll have to choose, her or me." This evidence, combined with the forensic analysis of the crime scene, began to paint a clear picture of what had transpired on that fatal night. DNA evidence found under Saffron's fingernails matched Everett's, indicating a struggle. Fibers from Everett's clothing were found on Saffron's body, contradicting his initial statement that he hadn't been in close contact with her that evening. As the case against Everett built, other witnesses came forward. A neighbor reported hearing raised voices coming from the Callahan house on the night of the murder. A colleague of Everett's mentioned his increasingly erratic behavior at work in the weeks leading up to Saffron's death. Perhaps the most damning testimony came from Constance. After days of questioning and faced with the mounting evidence of her husband's infidelity, she finally broke down. She revealed that she had suspected something was going on between Everett and Saffron for weeks. On the night of the murder, she had overheard part of their argument, but had been too afraid to intervene. As Detective Kirk compiled all the evidence, a timeline of events emerged. Saffron had confronted Everett about his affair with Veronica, threatening to expose both relationships if he didn't choose her. In a moment of panic and rage, Everett had strangled Saffron, then attempted to cover up his crime. The case, which had once seemed like a tragic home invasion, had unraveled into a sordid tale of forbidden desire, jealousy, and ultimately, murder. The respected Callahan family, once the picture of suburban success, now stood exposed as a web of lies and betrayal. The courtroom was packed each day as the prosecution laid out its case, painting a picture of a man whose web of lies and illicit relationships had finally caught up with him. The prosecutor presented a compelling narrative, weaving together the physical evidence, witness testimonies, and the damning contents of Saffron's journal. She portrayed Everett as a manipulative predator who had taken advantage of his young, vulnerable niece, then killed her in a fit of rage when she threatened to expose him. Everett's defense team attempted to cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial and that Saffron's journal entries were the fantasies of a troubled young woman. The trial's most dramatic moment came when Everett himself took the stand. Under intense cross-examination, he finally admitted to his affair with Saffron, but continued to deny killing her. His emotional breakdown on the stand, as he begged for forgiveness from his family, left many in the courtroom stunned. As the trial neared its conclusion, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. In a moment of high drama, the foreman stood and declared Everett Callahan guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Everett to 25 years to life in prison, bringing a close to a case that had shocked and captivated the nation. The Callahan tragedy left an indelible mark on the community. The family's once pristine reputation was in tatters, their name forever associated with scandal and murder. John Anderson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. John's body was discovered by his wife, Lisa Anderson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. John lay motionless in the living room, with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden and unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective James Carter, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Brooksville, everyone had their secrets, and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of John's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into John's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. John Anderson was a man of many facets. At 45, he had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Anderson's Supplies, which had been a staple in Brooksville for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, John was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Brooksville society. Despite his public persona, those who knew John well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Lisa had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young,
But over time, the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional arguments. Friends described John as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. John's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. That evening, John had planned to spend a quiet night with Lisa, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Lisa reported that John had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, and toxicology results were pending. Detectives Miller and Carter knew that they had to dig deeper into John's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Lisa and those closest to John, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Lisa Anderson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Miller and Carter knew better than to take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with John and her potential role in his death. Lisa worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their two children, Jake and Emily, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Lisa was well liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to John had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of John's death, Lisa recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how John had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Lisa's reaction to John's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved John and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Lisa's statements. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with John, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Miller and Carter decided to explore further, focusing on Lisa's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigation soon led them to Mark Benson, Lisa's co-worker. Initial inquiries revealed that Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detective suspected that there was more to the story than Lisa had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over John's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Miller and Carter arrived at the Anderson residence the morning after John's body was discovered. The house, a modest two-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Miller, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room where John's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. John lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that John had died of unknown causes, pending a full autopsy. Carter, Miller's partner, was outside speaking with the first responders. A burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, he had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. None of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Miller turned her attention to Lisa, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Lisa's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. John had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Miller noted the way Lisa's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact.
As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Miller and Carter spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Andersons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. A few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Evans, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing John the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, the detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Lisa and expanding to friends, family, and co-workers. The preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction, but Miller and Carter were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that John had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether John's death was natural or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Miller and Carter continued to scrutinize Lisa's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Lisa's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine, but the detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to John's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Lisa and her co-worker, Mark Benson. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Lisa's affair with Mark, exploring how it might connect to John's untimely demise. The discovery of Lisa's affair with Mark Benson was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Mark, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Lisa at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Miller and Carter decided to bring Lisa in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Lisa initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with John's death. Lisa explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. John had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Mark, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to John. Miller and Carter knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Lisa or Mark to John's death. They decided to bring Mark in for questioning. Mark was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Lisa. He claimed that he had no knowledge of John's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that they would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Lisa and Mark had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Brooksville and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in John's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Lisa's motive seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Mark without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Miller and Carter needed to establish a link between the affair and John's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Lisa or Mark. The detectives also started to scrutinize Mark's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Mark might have had his own motives for wanting John out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Lisa could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Miller and Carter were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Lisa or Mark to have orchestrated John's death. The stakes were high,
and the pressure was mounting. But the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Mark Benson presented himself as a confident and composed individual. But under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Mark was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Lisa a year prior. At 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Brooksville. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Mark maintained that his relationship with Lisa was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm John. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of John's death, providing an alibi that the detectives would need to verify. As Miller and Carter dug into Mark's background, they found several red flags. Mark had moved to Brooksville after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Mark was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Mark's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Lisa. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Mark wrote about his desperation to start anew and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate John. The detectives also uncovered that Mark had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Lisa as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Mark might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Lisa's newfound widowhood. To verify Mark's alibi, Miller and Carter visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Mark had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of John's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Mark, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Lisa. Miller and Carter pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Mark's composure started to fray, and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if John were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Lisa and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to John's death. Was Mark trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Lisa and Mark under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunities. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for John's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. As the investigation progressed, Miller and Carter encountered numerous twists and turns that complicated the case. New evidence surfaced, leading them down unexpected paths and challenging their initial assumptions. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. One such twist came when the toxicology report was finalized. The foreign substance found in John's system was identified as a rare, fast-acting poison. This poison was not something one could easily acquire, pointing to a premeditated act rather than an accidental overdose. The detectives now had concrete evidence that John's death was a murder, and they needed to find out who had access to such a substance. Their inquiries led them to a local pharmacy where the poison had been purchased. The pharmacist remembered selling the substance to a man matching Mark's description, but there was no solid proof linking Mark directly to the purchase. This added another layer of suspicion, but was not enough to make an arrest. While following up on the lead at the pharmacy, the detectives received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a secluded park shortly before John's death. This information suggested that Lisa might have been plotting something clandestine, possibly involving Mark. The detectives traced the call, but found that it originated from a disposable phone, making it impossible to identify the source. Simultaneously, a surprising piece of evidence emerged from John's business dealings. Financial records indicated that John had recently transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown account. Further investigation revealed that this account belonged to a private investigator named Alex Thompson. When questioned, Thompson disclosed that John had hired him to follow Lisa, suspecting her of infidelity. This revelation painted a picture of a man who was not only aware of his wife's affair, but also taking steps to gather evidence. The private investigator's report included photos and detailed logs of Lisa's meetings with Mark. These documents confirmed the affair, but also contained troubling information about Lisa's behavior. According to Thompson, Lisa had been acting erratically in recent weeks, frequently discussing her unhappiness and expressing anger towards John. In one recorded conversation, she mentioned feeling trapped and hinted at wanting to escape her marriage by any means necessary. This new evidence prompted Miller and Carter to reevaluate their approach. They decided to conduct a thorough search of the Anderson home, hoping to find something that might link Lisa or Mark directly to the murder. During the search, they discovered a hidden compartment in Lisa's closet, containing vials of the same rare poison found in John's system. This discovery was damning and suggested Lisa's direct involvement in the crime. Confronted with this evidence, Lisa's demeanor shifted. She became defensive and hostile, accusing the detectives of trying to frame her. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the poison and that someone must have planted it to incriminate her. However, just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Mark Benson came forward with new information, claiming that Lisa had manipulated him into helping her acquire the poison. He provided emails and messages in which Lisa discussed her plan to poison John, making it appear as though Mark was a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind. With conflicting stories from Lisa and Mark, Miller and Carter faced a complex challenge. They needed to determine who was telling the truth and who was orchestrating a cover-up. The investigation had revealed a tangled web of deceit, motives, and opportunities, but the exact sequence of events leading to John's death remained elusive. Conversely, Mark's narrative painted him as a pawn in Lisa's scheme. He described how Lisa had gradually introduced the idea of poisoning John, making it seem like a desperate measure to free herself from an unbearable situation. He admitted to helping her obtain the poison, but insisted that he had never intended for John to die. His portrayal of Lisa as the mastermind added another layer of complexity to the case. To uncover the truth, the detectives decided to conduct a final round of intense interrogations. They hoped to catch one or both suspects in a lie, or reveal inconsistencies that could break the case wide open. Miller and Carter knew that the key to solving the murder lay in understanding the true nature of the relationship between Lisa and Mark and the depth of their motives. In a tense interview, Lisa finally broke down. She admitted that she had felt trapped in her marriage and saw no way out other than eliminating John. However, she insisted that Mark had been an active participant, encouraging her to go through with the plan. Her confession provided crucial insight into her state of mind and her willingness to commit murder to achieve her goals. With this new information, the detectives turned their attention back to Mark. They confronted him with Lisa's confession, hoping to provoke a reaction. Mark, realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, began to unravel. He confessed to helping Lisa, but maintained that she had manipulated him from the start. The confessions from both suspects provided a clearer picture of the motives and events leading up to John's death. The detectives now had to piece together the final puzzle and determine how to proceed with arrests and charges, ensuring that justice would be served. The breakthrough in the case came when the detectives re-examined the timeline and physical evidence one last time. They discovered a crucial piece of evidence that had initially been overlooked, a security camera from a neighbor's house that captured a portion of the Andersons' backyard. The footage revealed Mark entering the Anderson home on the night of John's death, contradicting his alibi and providing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict for both Lisa and Mark. Lisa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Mark received a slightly lesser sentence due to his perceived secondary role in the crime. The community of Brooksville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, but there was a sense of closure as justice had been served.